Good morning. I'll call the order of the Regional Transportation Commission meeting of January 19th, 2018, with a roll call, please.
Neoma Jardin. Vaughan Hartung. Paul McKenzie. Here. Bob Lucy.
Here.
Ron Smith.
Here.
Lee Gibson.
Here.
Dale Ferguson.
Here.
And Rudy Malfabon.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Okay, Mr. Hartung, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
It'd be my pleasure, Mr. Chairman. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, while we salute the greatest colors in the world. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to move on to special recognitions, and the first one up is to welcome our new commissioner, returning commissioner, Vaughan Hartung. He's been away for 2 years, Vaughan?
That's correct. I took a little leave to pursue a career in medicine and comedy.
Okay, good, good.
No,
So-
seriously, I wanted
so-
to be a doctor, but I didn't have the patience.
So just so you know, to welcome you back in the spirit of everything we do here, we've already instructed staff, since you're back on the commission, that these meetings might run till 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Perfect.
Okay.
And donuts?
So what I'm saying is kind of shut up once in a while.
I'm sorry, your mic broke up.
Just a comment from the chair. Anybody else want to make a comment to Mr. Hartung? Or did I cover it? Anybody else?
Nope, you got it.
Okay.
Your turn will
Welcome,
be coming.
Vaughan.
Your turn will be coming, Mr. Chairman.
I love you, man. Okay, welcome, Vaughan, seriously.
No, thank you. Thank you
You're
for
a good
having me
addition
back.
to the authority, and
I'm excited
looking
to be
forward to
here.
working with you again. Okay, anybody in the audience want to welcome back Vaughan?
Thanks, Ron.
David.
Oh, it's open mic night.
Yeah.
David. Go on. No.
David, did you want to say something? No. You just-
David, just so you know, Commissioner Hartung was looking for you earlier.
Still have the same barber I see. That's good.
David's got the only hair that's certified a helmet in the state of Nevada. So that's where we're starting this
I do
meeting
too,
off
Dave.
today.
If I could wear it,
Okay,
I'd do it.
we're going to move on to recognition of the 2017 New Year's Eve free ride. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to continue this love fest with this next recognition. For the record, Michael Moreno, Public Affairs Manager. Happy New Year, Commissioners. I'm excited to be here again this year to recognize our sponsors for the 2017 New Year's Eve Free Safe Ride Program. The RTC, through the generous support of our sponsors, Renowned Health, Colo 8, Wood Rogers Inc., Club Calneva, REMSA, Maury Distributing, Reno Firefighters Local 731, the RSCBA, Cumulus Media, and our newest media partner, Lamar Advertising, help people celebrate responsibly on New Year's Eve. Lamar Advertising provided our message, which you see on the screen above you, on all of their 14 digital billboards in the area on New Year's Eve weekend. So this is a first for us, so I was really excited to bring them on board, and we're really excited to have them with us. This was a 33rd year for the program, which provides the community free, reliable, and a safe transportation option to make our roads safe on the holiday. Between 6 p.m. and 2 a.m., 6,781 rides were taken. Ridership was not as high as in previous years, but we attribute the decrease to New Year's Eve occurring on a Sunday. The last time it occurred on Sunday, it was back in 2006, and we only had 3,199 rides taken. So we had about 112% increase from then to now. The free Safe Ride program, which is offered for New Year's Eve and St. Patrick's Day, supports the statewide Zero Fatalities initiative, reinforcing awareness of not being an impaired driver or a pedestrian, as well as encouraging the public to try transit. Our messaging to promote the free service served to heighten awareness of the risks and dangers of being impaired. Promotion of the program is a community-wide effort with posters distributed throughout the Reno-Sparks area at gaming establishments and neighborhood bars, PSAs on Colo TV, Cumulus radio stations, and Lamar advertising billboards. The Nevada Department of Transportation also displayed the free service on freeway signs, and the casinos that have outdoor digital boards also displayed the free service. We had a robust social media presence with the support of Washoe County, the cities of Reno and Sparks, and our sponsors who also helped us promote the service on their social media channels. These are our sponsors and the representatives who are here with us today. I'm going to call their name. I invite them to come up and join us, and then a few of them may say a few words, and then we're going to take a picture. So first and up is Renown Health, Suzanne Hendry, and Crystal Herrera.
Should we give him a clap or you want to hold it?
Sure. Colo 8, Tom Peterson. Cumulus Media, Joe Francis and Jake Armour. Lamar Advertising, Matt Strophus. Wood Rogers, Andy Durling. Club Calneva, Brandon Seary. Reno Professional Firefighters, Local 731, Tom Dunn. The sponsors that could not be here with us this morning are RSCBA, REMSA, and Maury Distributing, but we acknowledge their support. Oh, RSCBA, I forgot.
Bob Lucy.
RSCBA, Vice Chairman Bob Lucy. So on behalf of the RTC board, our staff, and the community, we want to thank you for your support and partnership to provide this free transit service program in the Truckee Meadows. Many of you have been partners with us for years, and we really appreciate that continued support. When I speak to all of you, you are very passionate and committed to the program and recognize the value that it brings. So again, from all of us to all of you, thank you. Suzanne, did you want to say a few words?
Good morning. On behalf of Dr. Tony Slonim, our president and CEO at Renown Health, and on behalf of our 7,000 employees at both Renown Health and Hometown Health, we would like to thank the commission for all you do every day to give safe, efficient transportation to our community. And Vaughan, we're always welcoming you to come onto our medical staff once you get that MD degree over at Renown.
I'm busy writing ways to spell.
So it's been our pleasure to be a part of this program for so many years, and we just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Anybody else? Well, on that note, let's assemble in front of the dais, and commissioners, if you would position yourselves.
You know, Michael, while they're getting in position, I wanted to also comment on Lamar Advertising. They help out City of Sparks when we have a flood event by using those billboards, and they've been a big help to us. So they do more than just this. And without you folks, this event, the free ride, would not happen, so we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to be getting together with Matt, and because this is the start of a very long friendship and relationship, so.
We get in here?
All right.
Does it make us look thinner, though? That's all that matters. Suck it in, everybody.
Move that way, Mike says.
He's giving direction to the front row.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And don't move. One more.
The camera would make you smile.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you.
is it? Okay, and we have one more acknowledgement that's not on the agenda, so Mr. Gibbons,
Mr. Gibson.
Gibson, whatever.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I want to do a shout out to Sandra Rosenberg and her son Xander. Sandra, welcome back. It's been a while.
I saw her
And,
walk in.
and one more shout out I see next to her is Christina Leach, who's been a fixture in this organization, both at her time as an RTC employee, but also at Federal Highways. It's my understanding she's moving on to a new career opportunity in the freight group. And we want to acknowledge Christina, who started her professional career here right out of grad school. And Christina, nice to see you, and best of luck to you in your future endeavors. With that, special recognitions are, I think, done.
Okay, thank you. What's that? Oh, we have a birthday today? Yes. Oh. Paul, tell us about that.
Well, we're not going to get an opportunity to sing happy birthday to her on her birthday because it's on Sunday. But Sunday is Naomi's birthday. And I think she's 29?
21. She can finally drink.
Yeah, that's right. Oh,
Well, happy birthday.
yeah.
Aren't we all? Yeah. Okay, number one, approval of the agenda. Anybody want to pull anything? Mr. Lucy?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, looking
just-
for a motion.
Motion to approve, sir.
We have a motion and a second. Denise, did you get the second? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, I'm going to open up the public comment period. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak at this time, if you'll fill out a card. I do have two cards, and they're both on 5.2. Did, Juan, did you want to talk now or wait till 5.2? Okay, come on down. Juan Martinez? And Dora Uchu, you're going to speak also? Yeah. Okay, welcome. And what's your bodyguard's name there?
Which one?
The one on the leash.
The four-legged?
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Good morning. My name is Juan Martinez, and I'm partially blind. I do have a little eyesight. And this is my girlfriend, Dora Uel, and she's totally blind. This is her seeing eye dog, Baby. And I'm here to talk about, there's a bus stop over on West 7th and North McCarran. There's a bus stop there, and there's trees and bushes that are overlapping the sidewalk where no one can get through. To get through, they would have to walk on that busy street. So it's really hard for a person to walk through that sidewalk when all that debris is there. Go ahead.
My turn?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dora Will, as he said. We recently moved to that neighborhood, and some of the crosswalk, my dog is trained to walk between the crosswalk, the painted, but some of them are faded, so he gets confused and he veered out. And I would listen to the oncoming, the parallel traffic, so I would move to the left, but it gets confusing, especially with wind and rain, because I can't see, so I hear, but, and so it's scary. So if there's NDOT folks here, and just be advised with that. And also, David, I really want to thank you for the work you guys have done with automatic stop calls on the bus, because we recently moved to a new neighborhood, and it really is helpful when we use the Route 4 and 3CC and CL and all the other bus, because it tells us what bus stop are coming. And also the bus drivers, they're so kind lately, so I think it's the dog. But they're very helpful, David, so thank you. And also I want to recognize your customer service, Joe and Theota. I was lost one time. My phone I didn't get my map on my phone, so I called them, and they stayed with me to navigate me to a bus stop that is working, because some of them are on detour. Also, I this is for the paratransit, because I'm also on paratransit consumers. Susie, one time, I've been requesting for the cab drivers, the cab company to send me a non-smoking car, because it triggers my migraine, and it's not fair for my dog as well. I'm concerned with his health, because, he's my eyes. But they've been sending me a cab that has cigarette, they smoke cigarette. So last night they did, when we went to church, they sent a cab driver that had cigarette. So it kind of triggered my migraine last night, but I'm here to, I'm okay. And also with the 5.2, I just want to say that I know it's preliminary, but please do not raise the paratransit ticket higher than it already is, because some of us are on fixed income. I do have we have a part-time job, but with the housing going up, it's really hard to make ends meet. So I just want to say, please do not raise the paratransit ticket fare. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dora. Thank you, Juan. And, 5.1 today is the accessibility to the bus stops that is one of our items today. So, David, could you get together with them on the 7th Street bus stop they're talking about? Okay. Okay, any comments or questions? Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak at this time? Yes, sir. Come on down. Mr. Ray Lake.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I will fill out a card as soon as I finish.
Okay.
For the record, my name is Ray Lake. I'm the chairman of the North Valley Citizens Advisory Board and a resident of Golden Valley and a member of the Golden Valley Property Owners Board. Tuesday evening, we had a joint meeting of the North Valley's CAB and the City of Reno Ward 4 Neighborhood Advisory Board. One of the developments we heard was Echeverria Peavine Properties. And depending on which proposal you read, there seems to be more than one. It's somewhere between 250 and 600 plus units proposed in the area around Red Rock. The traffic report for the low number indicates that there's going to be roughly 17,000 average trips per day, with roughly 2,000 each direction on 395 during the peak hours. And we, as the two boards, generally felt that any further development in the North Valleys is a bad idea. It's not good for the people of the North Valleys, because 395 will not accommodate any more development, especially 2,000 vehicles during peak hours. So it's my position as board chairman and board member that any development in the North Valleys is a bad idea and a detriment to the residents out there. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ray. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak at this time? Okay, see no one, we'll bring it back to the commission and move on to consent items. Does anybody want to pull a consent item? I'd like to pull 3.3. Anyone else? Okay, looking for a motion to accept the consent items.
Move to accept.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. 3.3 is acknowledged receipt of the Southeast Connector monthly progress report. Garth, come on down. Did you want to say something? Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, Garth. When are we going to be finished?
This summer.
This be direct?
Yeah, I mean, just
When
go
this-
ahead to it, sir.
when this summer?
Yeah, for the record, Garth Oakes, engineering manager for the RTC. It's going to be dependent on Mother Nature. We've been fortunate so far that we've had a fairly mild winter, so we have not had a lot of weather days, so Grant has been able to make some progress. We just had a meeting Tuesday to discuss some items they're doing to kind of accelerate some work. They're kind of double crewing, if you will, on a couple of items for the bridge, and that's the major component right now. The last bridge that we have under construction, it's the northbound part of Alexander Lake Road. So if Mother Nature continues to cooperate with us this winter, we can get that bridge deck poured out. And then likewise, come springtime, the last little bit of work we really have in order for traffic to be able to use the road is paving. So it's going to be temperature dependent. So as far as, we've got to narrow down to a season, summer of 18. As we get through a few more weeks and a couple more months, we'll be able to narrow it down to a month. And then as we see what the spring does, we'll start narrowing in on an actual date.
Well, the reason I pulled this is twofold. I wanted to hear that. And the second part of this is I want to thank you for everything you've done at RTC. Garth is moving on February 1st.
Yes,
Okay, and you're going to work for another company?
yes.
Garth, you've done a great job on this project, and I know the weather, we had 2 floods last year, but everything's, besides being extended, has been just a fabulous job by you. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Lucy.
You know, I'd like to share the same comments, and I think, you know, Mr. Oakswell has been a very strong advocate for RTC, and with his time here, he's done a tremendous amount of work for us and has been a strong member of the engineering team and continues to lead that team, especially with the Southeast Connector. Parsons is going to gain a wonderful individual with you. It's going to be awesome to see you grow within that. What a wonderful company that you're going to as well. So hopefully they will bring more to Nevada as you being the regional director for them. So good luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Mr. Gibson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to be so easy on him. I remember last year at this time, if you'll recall, Garth, we were both in the office on Sunday. And I showed up in my blue jeans and a nice kind of warm shirt and a sweater and a coat. He was in there in something Jim Cantori on the Weather Channel would have been proud of in terms of his Weather Channel outfit. And we both went out and inspected the flooding that was occurring along the Southeast Connector. And from an academic perspective, was just very fascinating to sit there, as you'll recall, Garth, watching all of the improvements work as they were designed to work. Garth, I've told you this privately. I will tell you this on the public record. You are going into a position that will you will have to have diplomatic skills that will make Henry Kissinger look like an amateur. So I know you're up to it, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I do, on a more serious note, want to remind the Commission a project of this magnitude is managed by a group of people. We have Brian Stewart, of course, the Director of Engineering, but I also want to do a shout out to Doug Malloy. Doug, if you'd stand up for just a moment, I want to introduce you. Doug will be taking over as the project manager for the Southeast Connector. Doug has been with the Southeast Connector and actually has been side by side, just like we see Warren and Jeff together on 4th and Prater. They've been side by side. Doug was actually involved in the pre-construction services agreement back in the day when we were in the midst of design, final design, and negotiating the guaranteed maximum price and the terms for the contract with Granite. So Doug is fully aware and fully knowledgeable about all of the components. We're going to miss Garth. We're going to miss his sense of humor and optimism. And I just, again, want to wish him the best of luck. So,
Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quickly, we're going to miss you here, and good luck in with your future endeavors. I'm sure that you're going to excel wherever you go. So,
Thank you.
thank you for your time.
Please, everyone, turn off your phones. Mr. Hartung.
No, my phone's off, sir.
No, I know. Okay, thanks for those comments. Go ahead.
Garth, you've been a great front man for the Southeast Connector, never afraid to answer the hard questions that have been thrown at you, regardless of which group was coming forward. You've done a great job. We've known each other for many years, and you know, I'll be sad that you're not fronting some of our future projects, but look forward to working with you. That said, just bring me up to speed. Why haven't we opened up the north end from Gregg Street to Pembroke on the Southeast Connector? Because it's ready to drive. I sneak out there at night and kidding.
So that's the car we've seen on security cameras.
You don't want to know what he's
Just
doing.
kidding.
We're going to upgrade security.
So that's a great question. We get that one quite a bit because that section of the project has been, quote unquote, complete for quite a while. The reason why we have not opened that is actually twofold. That is still our construction access for the project.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'd be using Miraloma and Pembroke Drive and South Meadows Parkway. And one, those are no truck routes. Two, it just adds a lot of additional congestion, safety concerns, as we have the large trucks interacting with, local residential traffic. Second of all, that's our safety point. If there's actually there's 3 points. Second of all, that's our safety if there's another flood. That's where we move all of our material. When we had the flood last January, February, and March, we moved our entire construction complex up onto the roadway itself.
Yeah.
Third is if we open up that section, we would have to do improvements onto Pembroke Drive itself in order to accommodate those, the additional traffic, similar to what Carson City and NDOT had to do when they opened up phases of the Carson City Freeway. They had to do improvements on the regional road. So that's part of it. And really, it's less than a year of when that's been open to when we're going to open up the entire project. So we just, again, ask people's patience as we quickly wrap up this project, and we can open up the entire thing all at one time.
I've had a number of people ask me, because that's the edge of District 4, and they, of course, want to have access to that for convenience. And my comments have been because of construction traffic, and so, but you've answered it very thoroughly. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms.
Good luck,
Jardin.
Garth.
Ms.
Thank you.
Jardin.
Thank you very much. I can say you and I have spent some time together at a variety of meetings with regards to the Southeast Connector, and a number of those meetings were spicy, I guess is the best way to put it, and rather controversial, and got a little heated at times, and you always addressed everybody, regardless of their position and what they may have said, in a very respectful and professional way. I think the RTC is losing someone pretty tremendous in you leaving, but I'm also very excited for you in the future. You'll come back to the ribbon cutting, right?
Absolutely.
You had such a huge part of this.
Yes, absolutely. I will be there with a big smile on my face.
Good.
And happy for the team, as mentioned, the team of Brian and Doug and just everyone at the RTC, as well as the team we have out on the project. All the consultants we've had. Atkins is the construction manager out there, has just been absolutely phenomenal, and CH is the lead design too. So I'm very fortunate. As you mentioned, I've been the front of this project, but the team that's behind me, supporting me through this, has just been absolutely wonderful throughout the entire length of this project. So
Very good. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll move to approve 3.3. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Garth. Okay, we'll move on to director reports. 4.1, RTC Executive Director Report. Lee.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Amy, can you come up to the podium, and once you get that PowerPoint fired up, and then I'll just want to cover two quick items. You'll have in front of you, I believe you have in front of you, we have a service adjustment going into effect on January 27th. This is in part driven by, one, demand for transit service, but also two, the continuing labor shortage we're facing. We're going to trim 2 minutes off of the 10-minute headway. On the rapid, we're going to go down to 12 minutes. We're Route 6. We were going to drop to every 60 minutes. Route 9, that's actually primarily driven by demand. Route 9, Vassar Street, Harvard Way, Grove Street, and Linden Street will no longer be served by Route 9. Route 9 will continue operating on Kitsky. Bus service to the Airport Square, Costco Center, and Worcester High, those are now going to be served by Route 13 and 19 respectively. Route 14, service will operate on that route every 60 minutes. This is a combination of demand, well, mostly driven by demand. We think we'll be able to save some money and also still be able to provide our service to the customers. We'll be getting a more detailed report on some of the ideas on how we can restructure transit services. We've discussed here extensively. We're seeing demand for transit kind of flat to slightly down a little bit, although rapid ridership, well, that's flat. We really are going to go through an exercise over this next year where we're going to have to rethink a number of critical issues in terms of the service we provide and how we provide the service. I think the technology world, the transit world, the demand is all changing. It's changing rapidly. One of the demographic trends you'll be getting a report on here soon is, are we serving the areas where transit-dependent folks live? There's a growing body of analysis that seems to indicate we may not be serving those areas. So we're going to be, I'd say 2018 is going to be a year where we're going to have to make some very hard decisions about public transportation.
Lee, I have a question on the, you went to, for one route, went to 60 minutes. What
Yes.
was it before?
I believe it was 30 minutes. David, you want to acknowledge that? Yeah. So.
Okay, it's going from 30 to 60?
Last Friday, and I'm proud of this. But I'm, also want to maybe make an editorial comment. We were acknowledged by the Sheep Dip Group for the Pyramid-McCarran intersection project, and I appreciate that. We always are proud.
They gave you a seat cushion.
Probably going to show my cynical side here. I guess in a way I'm proud that we were awarded or recognized by a group that takes a very cynical and critical review of government. This project, as we all know from recent times, was delivered ahead of schedule and on budget. And our team from Parsons through HDR, through Atkins and a whole bunch of design folks and Granite, delivered this project very well. So I guess if we can pass that litmus test of the cynics of government, I guess we're doing something right. But what I want to focus on here is a PowerPoint that Amy's put up. There was an email sent by Mike Kazmersky from the Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada that really disturbed me a little bit. It made a couple of, it focused on some matters that frankly, and to be blunt, were not factual. The first of those was that we have no plans in our long-range plan to either think about a second road to the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, or for that matter, implied we weren't even going to improve the interstate system. And I think what I just want to remind the commissioners of quickly is that we operate, thanks to Sandra Rosenberg and Christina Leach and Amy, a performance-based planning process. That means our planning process and the projects we recommended or recommend in those plans are grounded in facts. They're also grounded in community input. And that we have slightly over $1 billion of freeway investments planned in our long-range plan, and that those projects and the priorities address the greatest regional safety and congestion issues. The email Mr. Kazmersky sent out seemed to imply that there's a great safety issue out at USA Parkway and I-80, or in the segment from Vista Boulevard to USA Parkway. And yes, there are growing accidents, and we're going to talk about that. But Amy, you want to go to the next slide? Why don't you, this is just a quick list of projects that are in our plan, including adding lanes in each direction from Rock to McCarran. We've got the PE NEPA, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Rudy, I think we're about halfway to 2/3 done with that. And, rapidly moving through that. We've got 3 good alternatives, so things are, looking good in terms of that. Knock on wood, because I know how NEPA can be. But again, from this list, you can see we have a number of projects, identified that will actually help our entire regional freeway system. Next slide, Amy. So again, just some quick overview of these. Go to the next one. This is a comparison of freeway crashes, and I want to just highlight a couple of things here. So again, it was asserted in the letter that somehow the Pyramid Highway or out east of here, there's some a wreck every day, and there could be a wreck every day. In fact, its crashes per day is 0.72. But if we look into the North Valleys, we see they have a very similar crash rate. In fact, and I would argue that that's a statistically insignificant difference. But I want to focus on the Spaghetti Bowl, and I know Commissioner Jardin has been a champion for this for her tenure on the RTC. We see in the 3-year period, 14, 15, and 16, 2,500 crashes in that area compared to 619 and 670. That's a crash rate of almost 100. This is kind of for traffic engineers. That's a crash rate of almost 100 crashes per 100,000 VMT, 2.5 times what we see out there. So I think what I really want to hammer home for everyone to understand is in our performance-based planning process, we are targeting, in cooperation with NDOT, putting improvements to where those crashes are very severe and at a very high rate. And it's clear from this chart that Spaghetti Bowl is way out in front of everybody. Can we go to the next slide, Amy?
Mr. Gibson, Mr. Hartung has a question.
Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you remind Mr. Kazmersky, with all due respect, that TRI was not conditioned in any way, shape, or form to make improvements on I-80, nor do they participate in the RIF program?
Mr. Chairman, I think in my letter that I've put on the table, I've simply addressed what I believe were the factual inaccuracies in his email. I didn't go into a deep dive history of
Understood,
of
but
that.
there's no participation in as would have happened in Washoe County that
And
any
that's
one of
correct.
the municipalities would have
No,
required.
that's correct.
Thank you.
This is a graphic I think is important, and I know this graphic is something, again, I'll do a shout out to Commissioner Jardin and actually to Commissioner McKenzie. They could draw this in their sleep. You can see this is the total crashes mapped on the freeway system. If you look to the east of the Spaghetti Bowl and south of the Spaghetti Bowl, you'll see the red lines. Those are the most intense crash rates That's the east to south movement. Look on the west side, the east side of the spaghetti bowl, you'll see red and yellow. Guess what? That's everybody coming back. And so we see a return, higher level incidence of crashes. Further out into the North Valleys, we see a long stretch of yellow. I don't want to underestimate yellow. That's just a lot of wrecks occur out there. Just in that particular case, it may be occurring along a longer stretch. But when we get out east, we see a lot of crash rate actually declines. Amy, why don't you just jump to the slide that shows this in total?
Ms. Jardin has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, more commentary. I think something, and I don't know if you have it in the slide here, is the emergency responders
Yep.
that consume a tremendous amount of our tax revenue and their time, which is restricted already in response. I will just say last night, as an example, after the State of the City address, so it wasn't peak traffic time, traveling over to Sparks, going by the Spaghetti Bowl, and there was a little bit of weather, a little bit of rain. There were no fewer than 5 cars piled up in the east to south ramp. So this is a daily occurrence, multiple times a day. I've been vocal about this for my entire time on the council, and I know the NDOT is making it its priority as well, as has the governor. So just an example, I think there was 3 highway patrol and a fire truck and some other things out there. So it's not just the people involved in the accidents, it's all of our first responders.
Thank you.
Amy, next slide. So I thought this was a quick little calculation we did that I thought was kind of interesting. When we look at the rate of increase of accidents, when we look out towards the east to the USA Parkway area, over that 3-year period we showed there was a 52% increase in the accident rate. But again, something I think Commissioner McKenzie can just, has, reminded us all. When we look up to the North Valleys, it's an 84% increase. So there's an actual a higher rate of increase in accidents out to the northwest and to the North Valleys than what we see going out east. Finally, the Spaghetti Bowl, while it's only a 26% increase, I would remind everyone that the absolute difference in accidents in the Spaghetti Bowl area is something on the order of 4 times what it is going out east and then going up north. So, and that's just a function of the intensity of the traffic volumes there. Next slide. I also wanted to address some of the misconceptions that may exist out there with respect to travel times and congestion. This is a slide, and it's a little geeky, but I think you can get the gist of it. It's a travel time index. It's real-time 2017 data we've collected from cell phones. We can measure, it's kind of scary what you can collect from a cell phone off of Google today. This is measured travel time over free flow travel time. And you can see, and it's kind of hard to see because I think just the colors sometimes are difficult. But you can see in the interior areas we have red, yellow, a little bit of green, but it's green all the way out east. And that's the 8 a.m. Peak period, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Next slide.
I think the peak time is 6 o'clock.
It's 6.
Yeah.
That, actually, I'll look to our, I believe our analysis focused on correlating this back to traffic volume data, which I want to touch on in a moment in terms of what the peak volumes are. Can we go to is that the okay, that's the afternoon slide. You see the colors are getting a little more intense, and I think what's interesting is it's in both directions. We see the inbound and the outbound travel times between Vista and the Spaghetti Bowl increasing. Go to the next slide. So why is that? And I want to focus on 2 answers to that. One is employment. Right now, I think the number Mr. Kazmersky quoted was something like 8,000 employees at the Tri-Center. That may be true, but there's something like between 11 and 13,000, almost 14,000 in the North Valley. So a substantial, larger source of employment, and it's going to remain a larger source of employment out to 2030. It's out in 2035, 2040, we begin seeing the Tri-Center catch up to the North Valleys. Hence, that's why we have a lot of our projects and programs targeted for the next 10 years in the North Valleys, and why we are still taking a little longer view with respect to some of the matters out to the east. Next slide. Amy, what happened to the traffic volume slide?
I believe it's in there, but it's hidden. So if we could just bring it out of
Yeah.
presentation mode.
could see it.
There's a traffic volume slide I thought was pretty interesting if you look at peak hour volumes.
Doesn't the first major shifts out in Trick start at 6 a.m.?
6 to 6.
Amy,
6 in
you
the
able
morning,
to?
6 at night coming home.
And actually, we have, I've actually driven that road, and what I've seen early in the morning is, yeah, it's crowded, but people are still going 65 miles per hour, which, you know, it's not like the North Valleys or the east to south movement on I-80 to 580 where, you know, traffic is dropping to 10 miles per hour and 20 miles per hour. Or stopped.
Or stopped, yeah, for 2 hours.
The employment slide and the traffic volume slide show something I think is worth noting, if we can pull it up. Remember on the employment slide, more employment in the North Valleys than at Tri-Center.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
And one note on the, Amy Cummings, RTC Planning, when you're looking at the total number of people on the freeway, when you're out towards Tri-Center, you're looking at about 19,000 cars per day. When you're around Vista, you're looking at about 24,000 cars a day, compared to the Spaghetti Bowl, where you have about 66,000 cars a day. So you can see that greatest concentration of traffic is going to be closest to the urban core.
And the point I wanted to make on this slide, and it's a little hard to read, is there's more traffic coming into the metropolitan area both in the morning and the afternoon that's going out. And so, again, I think that's a function of we're pulling people in from Fernley and from you know, our towns to the east of us. They're all coming into the Reno-Sparks area for jobs, for services, such as healthcare and education and shopping. And so, again, I just want to remind the commission, and I'm going to be making a presentation to the EDON Board of Directors next month. I understand, and I think we all understand on this commission, we have a lot of transportation challenges throughout the entire region. I think Rudy would acknowledge there's a lot of transportation challenges in the multi-county area that are under the jurisdiction of NDOT to deal with. But we have to run a performance-based planning system. We have to address the most critical needs. From a traffic volume, safety, and operation perspective, the Spaghetti Bowl, the North Valleys, the I-80 corridor within the Washoe County are the top priorities of this commission. That's where we've programmed our scarce federal funds. You know what? And that's another issue. You know, we're all dealing with limited resources. And when we have limited resources, you really got to make some hard decisions. Here at RTC, we try to make hard decisions based on facts. The facts clearly show our partnership and NDOT taking the lead on the Spaghetti Bowl are clear, sound decisions that we're making. And I would hope that we all come together. As far as the second road to the Tri-Center, you know, we are at a kind of a feasibility stage. There's a lot of questions about a second road to the Tri-Center. You have, you know, I'll put it out there right now. I mean, we have, especially with the federal government maybe shutting down over the weekend. I mean, the route for a second road to the Tri-Center would be predominantly on federal lands. It will require going through the bureaucracy and processes of the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Land Management. We will have to follow the National Environmental Policy Act, and it may literally take an act of Congress just to secure the right-of-way. We at the RTC, obviously, we put it in our plan, but it is a longer range, sort of way out, it's further out in time. And we need to take advantage of that. You know, oftentimes we find ourselves not with the proper time to plan. I think one of the things we may have an opportunity to do is plan properly, and I think that's an opportunity I don't want to miss. So with that, I'll conclude my director's report. I just, again, wanted to make sure that was corrected. We've had a long relationship with the Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada. We've had a very productive, and I consider Mike Kazmersky a friend. They've been actively involved in our planning process, but I'm not going to let the kinds of accusations such as, you know, not including any actions in our plan and not putting the facts in a comparative perspective and looking at our performance standards and making decisions. I can't let that sit out there. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to, Mr. McKenzie, did you want to say something?
Just real quick, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Lee, for doing the deep dive into this to answer some of the accusations that were made by EDON in their attempts to reprioritize our transportation initiatives in this area. And I would kind of echo on what Mr. Hartung said, is that the industrial center out there in Story County, their planning for that facility wasn't done in a reasonable manner to address the impacts they were going to have on the community. And the state has bailed them out with a road to Highway 50 that was a huge undertaking, and those dollars could have been spent in areas that are trying to plan for transportation and trying to address their issues as they go. It could have been spent there rather than for that new road that what they call it, 3 wild horses and 2 cars a day highway. And so the idea that EDON should pressure the transportation planners in the state into changing their priorities for a county that doesn't want to take care of their own infrastructure issues, that's what offended me most about the idea. And we in this board have talked about the fact that Story County needs to put some skin in the game before we start planning something to help bail them out. They need to be involved in it financially as well as just wanting it. So again, I thank you, Lee, for digging into this, and we appreciate that.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the federal report. Mr. Gibson?
Mr. Chairman, I hope there's a federal government that we can use on Monday morning. My understanding is that they probably are not going to come to a compromise, and we may have a shutdown. With that good news, the tax reform package did finally pass. I guess we may see everybody who has a job may see a bigger paycheck next time. But then again, what happens to our tax revenues? If the IRS is not there to collect them, can we just sort of hold on to them for a while?
Sure.
So the one disappointment in the tax bill that I'm really upset about is our advanced refunding recommendation didn't get included. Stephanie, as I think we mentioned at the last meeting, is not going to be able to refinance our debt and save us $2 million. We're going to have to wait another year until we get to that point, I think, in the bond documents that we're allowed to do that. I haven't given up on that. There's a tax extenders proposal. Senator Hatch has got out there. We may try to see if we could take another run, no pun intended, up the hill and see if that could work. The Capital Investment Grant Program, there's a letter writing campaign to make sure that the Republicans and Congress continue to fund that program and see that projects such as Virginia Street continue through. Of course, there's a note in here that the current funding deadline is today. I think we can all watch the news. Of course, they're all wrapped up in the DACA and border security questions. I think the one thing that Rudy and I are going to be focusing on, Rudy can maybe address this in his report, there's an alleged infrastructure package that will be released by the White House sometime in January. I think we as a state need to get together and identify our priorities, both from a policy and project standpoint. The one thing I'm a little, again, hopeful for, there's a 48-member bipartisan group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, and this group, this is a combination of Republicans and Democrats, and they are suggesting that perhaps it's time to look at the federal government doing what we do here in Washoe County, which is indexing the federal gas tax to inflation. Perhaps now that there's been some deep tax cuts offered and implemented, looking at increasing user fees, which is in effect what a gas tax is, and indexing that user fee to inflation is something they may have an appetite for, which that would, of course, bring a substantial opportunity for RTC and NDOT to fund many of the projects we just talked about. So the other hopeful sign is the president seems to, and he unexpectedly did this, has told a group that he would be supportive of bringing earmarks back. Earmarks are the congressionally directed spending procedure that has allowed us over the years to build a number of projects, including 4th Street Station. They're going to be working through that, and hopefully maybe they can come to some sort of agreement. With respect to the Bridge Investment Act, there's a proposal out there to start putting $75 billion over 10 years to help repair bridges in this country. That, of course, would be a big help for us, especially when we look at some of the bridges in our region, and the one that comes to my mind is the Keystone Bridge. And last but not least, they still continue to struggle with some of the personnel. Paul Trombino, who was nominated to be head of FHWA, has withdrawn, they'll continue to struggle. Next month, I've asked Anya Graves and John Porter to come out to perhaps give us an assessment and provide briefings on where we may be or may not be with respect to the federal programs we rely on. The federal revenues account 35% of our total budget revenue. It's an important part of our program. Any interruption to those grant funds, any interruption to the flow of dollars, we're moving forward. We've selected a consultant to do the Audie Wells design, which is going to involve federal funds. We hope that we don't see a delay as we progress through that. We hope this gridlock doesn't create a delay for us. I think the last time we went through a shutdown, I'm looking out into the audience at our federal representative, I believe FHWA remained open because it's a trust fund operated organization, but the Federal Transit Administration and others did not. We're also monitoring very closely what, I'm trying to get a report today from our folks back east on what will be open and what will not be open. I'm hoping we don't have a situation where, for example, there's a glitch in Social Security Administration, Veterans Administration, those types of things. I believe Veterans Affairs is not usually impacted by shutdowns, but we'll stay tuned, and Michael and Lauren will be perhaps issuing immediate releases over the weekend if there is some change or there is some impact to RTC operations that affect us. So with that, I'm done.
Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One additionally, if we were to change the indexing on gas tax, I'd love to see a small tax levied on Story County that just goes directly to NDOT on their gas.
Didn't they try that? Well, I'm going to let you address that in your report, because I believe that was tried last year in the indexing, statewide indexing effort that was defeated by the voters.
It's another 30 cents a gallon.
So
They only have one gas station, so it doesn't really matter. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on to the NDOT monthly report. Mr. Malfavon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What Lee said, basically. Yeah. So we're not as impacted. FHWA offices here in Carson City will still be open since we have the Highway Trust Fund at the federal level. But one of the things that does impact the Department of Transportation is when they keep on doing these short-term continuing resolutions. As you recall, the first one went to December 8th, and they gave themselves 2 more weeks to the 22nd, and then now today, the 19th of January, then they're talking about possibly a few days or to next month, February 16th. Well, when they do these little increments like that, they don't release all the funding available. It is a reimbursement program, so we anticipate what it really affects is the ability to get into the financial system and program your projects. So it does have an impact on us, but not significant yet. We're hoping that they have come to terms with in the Senate and pass the full fiscal year. The other thing that they have to eventually deal with is this issue of emergency relief for the states that had suffered from wildfires, hurricanes last year. And as you recall, the president the administration asked for an offset in spending to several agencies, one of them $1 billion to USDOT. Congress can do what they want. The administration can request, but it's up to Congress to decide on that. But if they do take back $1 billion of authority from USDOT, it just filters down to the states, and one of the programs, as we saw in last year's rescission that was affected, was the congestion mitigation and air quality funds that go to Washoe County and RTC of Southern Nevada. It's actually state DOT funds that we distribute to those locations where there's air quality issues with non-attainment. So definitely want to spend those funds, commit those funds as soon as you have them. In some cases, when you're holding them, because we do have 4 years to spend that money, when you hold them, it just puts them at risk of getting swept up, because they really concentrate on the state DOT's money. They don't try to hit the RTC's or the MPO's share of the federal funds, but this is just kind of an unintended consequence of rescissions, is they take the state DOT CMAQ funds, which filters down to the RTCs in Washoe and Southern Nevada. We expect that after the State of the Union on January 30th, the details from the infrastructure package will come out. My sense is that it's going to be looking at the same talk that they were talking about, leveraging the federal funds to get 20% federal and 80% other, whether it's private, state, local. I think that they're still sticking with that idea, based on some comments that the Undersecretary of Transportation, Derek Kahn, was at the National Governors Association Conference in Vegas last week, and he talked about the issues, the programs that huge projects are taking a bite out of multiple years of funding when you're looking at these grant agreements or the capital investment program for FTA, for instance. He alluded that it's better for locals to raise their revenue locally and it stays there locally. To me, it was just given a little tip that it's probably going to be that kind of situation in the future from the feds. Is they're going to look at state, local, and private funds to provide the bulk of the funding for transportation and transit. The other thing with wanted to mention and thank RTC and your sponsors for the program, the Free Safe Ride program, because we had our fatality numbers and they were down 7% last year. Was 24 less people died on our streets and highways in Nevada as compared to the previous year, 2016. And specifically on alcohol impairment, it was down 43% because of projects programs just like that are sponsored. They do it in here in Reno and Sparks, and also in Las Vegas on events like New Year's. I know you do that on some of the other holidays that people like to go downtown and celebrate, and it's just with the transit rides available, it just makes it a lot simpler to get them home safely. At the National Governors Association Conference last week, the focus was on innovation and technology, and a lot of discussion about autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles. I know that the RTC here is doing a project with the university to look at the implications of transit and communications with where the buses are, looking at what are the situations on the street network to get really a transit system that's reliable. And one of the implications, though, of the things like transit networking companies, Uber and Lyft, is that, as Lee said, ridership is kind of flat or starting to decline, and as people are looking at Uber and Lyft. Even at the state level, there was the Secretary of Transportation for Massachusetts said that they're using it for paratransit because it saved a lot of money. So I know that those are some of the things that you're going to be looking at here, is the implications of that and ridership and paratransit. Interestingly, you had Lamar as one of the sponsors for your Free Safe Ride program. Wanted to mention that we put out a public notice at the end of the year that we are having a public hearing on this digital billboard regulations. I know that's been an issue discussed at the City of Reno City Council meetings. The reason that we're having another public hearing was just to, at the request of the Legislative Council Bureau, they asked us to just have one more public hearing, and then they could adopt the regulations, because I think that they tweaked the actual verbiage that NDOT had submitted after it was approved by our State Transportation Board. But that's February 12th at the Transportation Board meeting. So we'll have the final public hearing and adoption formally of those digital billboard regulations. I appreciate Lee's comments and want to reinforce that Spaghetti Bowl and North Valleys are high priorities for NDOT. I know that obviously we'll work with the RTC on looking at other issues for traffic to that eastern kind of corridor in Sparks to get to the industrial center. But for the immediate term, we have to concentrate on Spaghetti Bowl, getting that environmental document approved and getting that first project out for construction as soon as we can. And obviously the traffic issues with the North Valleys, we want to do some improvements on 395 as well. So it's not a bad idea to look at that planning level study, feasibility, and then eventually figure out what we're going to do together with other partners to fund any other kind of improvements that are needed in the area. But really, it's Spaghetti Bowl and North Valleys are the highest priority for NDOT. And that concludes the director's report from NDOT. I'm willing to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rudy. Any questions or comments? Mr. Hartung?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I haven't had an opportunity, Mr. Malfaban, to thank you personally for the decel lane from Pyramid Highway onto Calle de la Plata heading north. Great comments from all the residents. They love it. And I wanted to thank you and this board, every member of this board, for approving the signalized intersection at Calle de la Plata and Pyramid. Rudy, I'm hoping that your staff will also work with Martin Marietta and get Martin Marietta is willing to participate in getting the acceleration lane from the Hall Road to Calle de la Plata heading south, dedicated lane for that. And again, I'm deeply in your debt, and I really thank you for looking at that. It's going to really make that roadway a lot safer.
Thank you, Commissioner. Definitely, we're looking at some type of agreement that we could basically offset. I know that the company that was suggesting provision of materials to make some improvements out there along Pyramid Highway, we're probably going to look at some other type of commitment from them that would basically, we can use it for maintenance and we'll do it with our regular construction program to make other improvements there.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to Public Transportation Operations 5.1. Acknowledge receipt of an update report on bus stop accessibility. Mr. Jinkling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Commission, I'm David Jickling, Director of Public Transportation and Operations for the RTC. And I have a PowerPoint here. Thank you, Denise. At the last month meeting, there were some questions that came up regarding some specific bus stops, but overall just the status of our bus stop program. And so we thought this was a great opportunity to give you a quick overview and a little background on how we manage bus stops. And as we heard under public comment this morning, questions from the public about just accessibility and maintenance of bus stops that I can try and address as well. I think most of you have heard, we've got over 1,000 bus stops in our community, and managing all of those is a bit of work. And our budget to make improvements has been historically pretty small. We've relied largely on development and roadway projects to make those types of improvements, but we do go and do spot improvements where we see a real accessibility need. In 2016, we just were able to improve 5 bus stop pads, 2017 another 5, so you can see it's a fairly slow process. But we do get some assistance. The Grand Sierra Resort a year ago very graciously agreed to pour and create 3 new pads for us to bring their stops up to accessibility. We then installed the shelter that you can see there. We have 3 shelters that we put in place. So that was a nice partnership. And I think that shelter there gives you an example of a really nice looking shelter. We even put the GSR logo on it for them just to try and make it tie into their colors and all. And then NDOT, of course, is our partner as well. NDOT does operate and is responsible for a number of the roads in our community, some of which have bus routes on them. And NDOT recently did some improvements in Sun Valley on Sun Valley Boulevard that improved 4 stops in there. As I mentioned, all of our road projects will address accessibility issues on sidewalks and bus stops as appropriate. We also have a fair amount of money that is budgeted for ADA bike and pedestrian improvements annually, $2.3 million roughly, that goes out and does other kinds of projects this year. Mill Street will be improved, Keystone, but some of those funds in the future could be potentially purposed for specific bus stops if that was something that you all felt was a higher priority for us. And as I mentioned, through the development review process, both Reno-Sparks, Washoe County, we get the opportunity to comment on all the projects. And if there is an existing bus route adjacent to the project, we've been pretty successful in making our requests that accessibility to that development, as well as along those pedestrian ways, include bus stop improvements. Not to say that things don't occasionally fall through the cracks that are missed, but we've had a pretty good track record with that. This fiscal year, starting in the spring here, we hope to improve another 15 stops. Looking generally across all of our system, we've added 7 new shelters and 133 new benches to those 1,000 bus stops in the past couple of years. Almost 60% of our stops have a bench, which actually is a pretty good number. About 13% have a shelter. It's hard to get that information nationally to see how do we compare, what are other systems doing. It's not really tracked easily, but we did find a study done by MARTA that showed that about 85% of their stops did not have either a bench or a shelter. So it's that classic, I think Chairman Smith commented on, the pole by the side of the road that says bus stop. And that's really probably the norm in this country in terms of fixed route transit. But I think everyone's endeavoring to try and improve those stops and bring them up to a speed that is more appropriate. We have a number of guidelines, some of which are in law, of how we design bus stops, and certainly the ADA is a big driver of all that. But the Architectural Resource Board, I'm spacing on the name there, United States Access Board, it says right there. If I just look at my slide, has the primary guidelines that we follow, and it's looking at a 96-inch deep pad that allows for the bus to stop and load or unload a wheelchair and provide ample room for the wheelchair user to maneuver, and then a 5-foot width. So generally 8 feet deep, 5 feet wide is the pad requirement that we try and meet. And of course, having that along a sidewalk with an accessible path that either gets the user to the intersection, or in some cases just into the roadway, if that is a reasonable route for them. Over the past few years, we've really tried to focus more attention on ADA. We've used interns from UNR to help us assess all of our bus stops, and through that process, we identified 183 of those 1,000 stops that needed improvement to bring those up to full ADA accessibility. And so, armed with that information and where those stops are specifically, as well as guidelines we have in our planning documents, we have prioritized stops for improvement. And just real quickly, so you are aware that we don't just do this sort of willy-nilly. We do have procedures, we do have factors and criteria that we look at, many of which you've asked about and make some sense, but certainly things dealing with how many people get on and off at that stop. Where we can, we look at wheelchair boardings. We don't want to improve stops that we know are going away in a service change a year from now, but sometimes that's difficult because transit routes do change, and you make an investment in a bus stop that 2-3 years later is no longer served by transit is clearly something we try to avoid. And then because of our limited funding, we may have a stop that's going to take $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to improve versus 5 or 6 that we can do at $10,000 apiece. So we have to balance those kinds of challenges as well. Placing bus stops can be very challenging. I would love to say that every residential area and business welcomes us with open arms, but they don't. It tends to be difficult sometimes with new stops finding the appropriate location to put them. And so we have criteria that we look at trying to minimize that impact both on residential neighborhoods as well as commercial. We operate in the street. We stop in the street. We have driveways. We have turning movements. We have traffic lights. All of those things, parking, that affect the safety of our operations, the safety of our customers and everyone involved. So those are challenging things to look at. I wanted to just give you a quick little snapshot of just a few examples of the sorts of things we do. Generally, an improvement like the one you see here is about $10,000, and we had a stop here on Industrial Way, just along the side of the road. In that area, if you're familiar with it, there's no sidewalks. It was really built for industrial use and trucks and things like that, but there's a lot of employees dependent on our services. If they are ambulatory, that stop worked just fine for them. But clearly, if you're in a wheelchair or need a mobility device, it didn't. So we installed a pad there and ran the sidewalk up to the corner for folks to use. So that gives you a sense of how we do that. This is one on Charlene's. The utility fire hydrant comes along and gets plopped down right in the middle of the sidewalk, and of course that makes it non-ADA. That wasn't our doing, but we then corrected it, just a minor putting in some concrete to make sure there's that accessible path around that fire hydrant. Commissioner Jardin brought up concern about a couple of stops specifically on Charlene's that we just wanted to show you real quick. This is one of them. This is Charlene's and Robb, just west of Robb on Charlene's. It's a big vacant lot. We put that stop there because there was a request for it. We knew at the time that we didn't have the funds to put in the sidewalks and other improvements. It's not heavily used. About 11 people get off there each day. They get on at a different stop by a different route on Robb. But this is one that to improve would be fairly complicated, and I'll show you why. The stop is right there. The green lines show you the right-of-way. So there is insufficient right-of-way for us to go in and put sidewalks without having to take an easement from the property owner. Generally, our historical sort of development process here would be waiting for that lot to be developed, for a 7-Eleven to go in with a gas station, and then we require the sidewalks. The city of Reno requires the sidewalks. We require the bus stop pad. To put in sidewalk and pad from that stop to the intersection of Robb, about 150 feet of sidewalk, the pad itself. But again, as you can see, there isn't right-of-way to do that. So that's a complicated one. So for us right now, if our decision were to make that ADA, we would have quite an undertaking. The simplest solution, had we had, and I'm not sure that we've had a formal complaint per se about that, is just to remove the stop. Clearly, removing stops isn't always the greatest solution either, because there are people who use it. But sometimes if a civil rights ADA complaint comes in, that may be our solution. Is there a question, please?
Thank you. So a couple of things, if these factors play into it or not. So 2 things. If you were to take a Google Maps and you followed Charlene's up a little bit, kind of Mavericks is on your left, and you keep going up. There's another bus stop which has about a 1.5 foot wide.
Got that one right here.
Area. Yes. Okay, so between bus stop A and bus stop B, there's no sidewalk, there's nothing going on.
Correct.
This one here, and again, if you did Google Maps up further Charlene's, there's so much overgrowth that people are walking out in the street to get to this stop.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. But my question is, you had a slide earlier where it showed just a pad with a bench. right there. Could that not be done on the corner of Charlene's and Rob? I mean, you didn't put full sidewalks in there, right?
Oops, no, excuse me. Correct. And that is a less than desirable solution, but is certainly a possibility.
Well, hell, it's a solution.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's not ideal.
Yeah, it is.
But
And-
given the proximity to two really poor bus stops in a row, where I see people holding their groceries all the time out in the rain.
Right.
At the very least, this one should have a pad and a bench.
Yeah.
Because the next one, there's no space to do it, period. That next one up, I question whether, for safety reasons, it should be there. Because it truly is shoving people out onto the street to access it, because that sound wall or that
Right,
property
right.
line wall is so close, and there's so much overgrowth of bushes and stuff, that they're out on the street. I mean, I don't see people stopping at that one.
Yeah,
So is there conditions that allow us to fix this one at least?
Possibly, and I think your suggestion is a good one for us to look at, as opposed to running a sidewalk all the way up to the corner, the intersection with Rob. As you look at this, and obviously we don't have scales on here, but it would look as though if we were to go a little bit, I guess my laser doesn't work, but a little bit further to the north, where the right-of-way line gets a little deeper, the question is, do we have 8 feet? That's what we need, and I'm guessing we've got 5 or 6 maybe, so there'd still be this little approaching whoever owns that and saying, can we get another couple feet from you? That's fairly easy to do, I would think, on an undeveloped lot here. Then we put the ramp from that pad into the street. And so a wheelchair user would then be navigating along the shoulder that becomes a bike lane, I believe, or in there. I would say that that is a possible solution. It's not always the best, particularly because of the traffic volumes in here. That would concern us a little bit, but it is a possible solution that we could look at.
And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, I think that that entire lot there is owned by Renown, maybe. So I think there might be some representatives in the room that maybe have some folks that can talk to Renown about giving us those few feet of access so we can put that in. And while it's not ideal, it's certainly a hell of a lot better than what's there now. And consider this a complaint on behalf of the constituents that are using this bus stop. So for the
Yeah,
record.
no, I definitely considered that a complaint earlier, so it's definitely one we're going to look at, and all that. In terms of this one, I guess we actually, believe it or not, probably this is an easier one for us to fix, although it's a little bit pricey. The right-of-way line here is actually the tall wall. It's the sound wall that backs up their yards. The landscape lower wall there in the foreground is in public right-of-way. So we could potentially carve out a pad that goes back to that big wall and have a bus stop there. It would be a little expensive to do, but is possible. This stop serves the apartments across the street. What's interesting is this doesn't show it in this picture, but there are pedestrian crosswalk signs there to alert motorists that pedestrians are crossing. There is not a striped crosswalk itself. So to make this one work, we would do something deeper in terms of a pad at that stop, probably put the crosswalk in, put in a refuge barrier in that little median, and bring people across to there. This is a more heavily used stop than the other one because of the apartments. But these are definitely the challenges we face, and there's not always a good, clean, easy solution, but we will look at both of these. They're both on our list for fiscal year 18 to this spring, summer, to really see what can we do to address them, and we'll keep you apprised as to what we do on that. Here's the complete list. Just real quick, you can see these 18 or 15 routes or so, or stops, excuse me, are ones that we're looking at, assessing right now for spot improvements. At this sort of rate of improvement, we're about 10 years to fix those 173 roughly left to go. I would say that's not a satisfactory rate. So I think one of the things we can do is look very hard at the funding that we have available to us in our gas tax program that makes some of the roadway improvements, and see if we could address these in a more expedient fashion. So with that, I would answer any other questions that you may have.
Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great presentation, Mr. Jickling. As you probably remember, when I left the board transit was on my radar. I love the idea that you've outlined on page 3 for microtransit considerations, smaller buses. Right here on 9th Street, midday, you can sit in any of the offices along there and literally count on one hand the number of riders as that bus goes back and forth. And so rather than running one of the, what I call the 92-footers, I know they're not quite that long, but it seems appropriate, to run something smaller. And then you brought up the Route 18 in Sparks. The ridership is 21,316, and it ranks 10th. But I would wager that that 21,316 is probably peak hour rides. So is that bus running all day long?
It is, and you've skipped ahead to the next agenda item, so I will get to all of those shortly if you like. But yes, that is a all-day service.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, what we had talked about before I left, prior to my leaving, was flexing those things to where there's higher ridership,
Right.
and even utilizing them to move UNR kids, or just flexing them throughout the system. And then potentially, if there's an issue in terms of having a small amount of ridership, you just flex in a microbus. Just something.
Yeah,
or even,
that's what we're looking at for sure. And
Okay, can we get back to 5.1,
well,
please? Yes?
that's what I have right here. Okay.
Mr. McKenzie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on 5.1, I think that we need to be a little more intentional about assuring when we have development that we get quality bus stops put in. I know that in the North Valleys, we've had a lot of recent development that we've got the stick in the sidewalk and nothing else. And a lot of those places, they aren't the best locations for a bus stop because we're quite a ways from a crosswalk. They're narrow sidewalk or no sidewalk. And so as we move forward, seeing that new development, we'd be a little more intentional in making sure that we get a quality bus stop put in there on the developer's dime, and make sure that we've got the amenities that support it put in along with it. And I mean, that one along that sound wall was definitely one that a developer got away with just sticking a sand. And there was no consideration given to what that bus stop needed to look like to service the people that were going to be utilizing it. So,
Mr. Lucy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jickling, on that, the stop on Charlene's that they were all referencing in regards to the one along the sound wall. Who was the developer? Was the developer who the one that did the inputted that put that planter box in there?
I don't know. That was quite some time ago. I'm going to assume so. I doubt the city of Reno put those in. I suspect it was part of the development, yeah.
And when we place these, do we have, I mean, is there a standard that we have, obviously ADA, but is there a standard if we go and see a spot like that we go and immediately put some sort of enforcement in with either the city of Reno or the city of Sparks or Washoe County, for that matter, to say, look, this is our spot, this should be maintained, and that enforcement be, because we don't have an enforcement arm at RTC, but we do through all the entities. I think that's one of our things, at least a policy from our board should be that if we're going to go put, and I know all these stops go through extensive planning, through engineering prior to those placement, that we see that there's obstruction within the right of way, and that should be dealt with immediately.
I absolutely agree with you. Bus stops probably, to be honest with you, are one of the more complicated things we deal with in transit. I talk to you all the time about transit service, but bus stops are very complicated, and the process for development. Charlene's was put in essentially to serve the development to the west, the drawing a blank, Somerset, thank you, and that connection to Robb. So when Charlene's first went in, it was a road through nothing. Very quickly, some of the development with the apartments on the left as you're heading west came in. I can't recall the timing of the development on the other side, but when that road went in, it didn't have sidewalks anywhere. It was just a road, boom, right on through.
Well, I think there should be a policy from RTC that when roads are built and that if, because we do plan out 20, 30 years in regards to not only our development of roads, but also our mass transit, that we have those entitlements in place well in advance with the entities so that that we don't end up in situations like this where we're going back and retrofitting stops that should have been addressed well in advance.
I absolutely agree, and a lot of the stops that we are being challenged with, it's legacy roads, if you will, that were put in years ago when some of these considerations by both the RTC as well as the local jurisdictions weren't where they are today. Okay. So certainly going forward, I'm confident that what we are doing as the RTC, and I can't completely speak for the local jurisdictions, but is much better. But I'll tell you, there are still some roads that I see going in where a sidewalk is only on one side. It's not felt that it needs to be on the other side. And for transit service, generally we like to go both directions on that road. It doesn't serve us. And so, we don't make those policies. That's Washoe County, Reno, and Sparks that has set those standards. We certainly give input and comment, but it does need to be, I think, a local driven with some support from us changes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One more question.
David, for me, I think you mentioned we did 5 upgrades in 16 and 5 in 17. This year, going to do 15.
Well, we've got roughly, I believe it was 15 that we're looking at, whether we'll have funding to do that many. I think we have about 150,000 this year for that.
For me, it's time that we fix these bus stops and find the funding to do that. I've used my discretionary funds to bring up some of the stops and Sparks to ADA levels. If we put a bus stop at the Legends, which I'm sure they asked for, and we just stick a sign in the dirt, and now it's a bus stop, I don't think we should do any bus stops unless we can put at least minimum a bench. So for me, we need to take care of this issue because it's not only in Charlene's and Reno and the county. It's in Sparks. It's everywhere.
It is.
And our bus ridership is down.
Yep.
And if it's raining and snowing and they've got no protection, I don't know what they do. But they're not going to walk to a bus stop and stand there in the pouring rain or the snow. So I would ask that we move this forward and try to get these done. And I know it's all about the money, and maybe get together with Lee and Stephanie and find out what we can come up with to get these things done in a timely manner. They don't put a signal in without somebody paying for it. So some of these developments, like the Legends, and I'll use the Legends because it's Sparks, if they want a bus stop there, they're going to put in a proper bus stop.
Thank you.
That's for me.
Appreciate it.
Ms. Jardin.
Thank you. And just quickly, I agree. And if I have to use some of my funds here at the RTC to get at least a bench and a pad poured on that corner of Charlene's, I'll certainly be open to that. The more immediate question, whether it's City of Reno, I don't think there's an HOA. It was an older neighborhood that was on the right there where you saw that wall with all the overgrowth. We do need to coordinate and get that stuff trimmed back. Whoever does it, if someone can coordinate, I don't know who does it, us, City of Reno, whatever. But it is shoving people out onto the road. So
I agree. That's one of those other issues that is challenging. Generally speaking, the maintenance of vegetation is the property owner's responsibility. The city can issue them a take care of it order, if you will, through the forester. They then have a certain amount of time to do it, and if they don't, then the city can come in and take care of it. That's how it should work. Reality is, with stretched budgets and limited staff, those things often don't happen. I would be happy, I don't know if Lee would, but I'd be happy if RTC took responsibility for that. We can go and trim those trees where they interfere with our bus and routes, let the property owner know we're going to do it, much like NV Energy has that authority or something. But those problems are throughout the community. We have a lot of places where overgrowth affects it, and we don't have the authority to go in and trim trees.
However we start the conversation.
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah,
okay,
I agree.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So for me, I'd like you to get together with Lee and Stephanie and find out what we can come up with and maybe a plan to fix these things. maybe it's undoable, but I think we need to look at this. And like Mr. Lucy was talking about, we need standards. We're not going to put a bus stop anywhere just because you want a bus stop there unless it has a minimum requirements.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, this is for possible action, so I'd like to make a motion if possible.
Okay?
I'd like to direct staff, first, I'd like to make a motion to acknowledge the receipt of the update of the report, but I also would like to direct staff at this time to work with Mr. Jickling and the entities, all three entities within the region, and start working on an enforcement policy or process from the RTC standpoint in regards to our accessibility improvements of our bus stops.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Did you get that? Any further discussion?
Just real quickly, Mr. Chairman, if the motion maker would like to add in that we come up with a standard for stops and that we don't put any more new stops in unless they're built to a certain standard.
Okay. Motion agrees.
Okay, motion's been changed. Seconder? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, that was a good report, Dave. Thank you. 5.2, acknowledge receipt of the preliminary service change and fare concepts. Okay, this is you, Mr. Hartung. It's okay, we're good. Mr. Jinkling.
Okay. Thank you. David Jickling, Director of Public Transportation and Operations. So we wanted to bring to you early on, before we got too far down some of these paths, some of the concepts we're looking at for service adjustments this September. With service, we haven't made adjustments to our fare policy in quite some time. And looking at that, we recognize that there's both policy issues that should be changed to give you all a little more flexibility in our executive director and how we approach fares, but also perhaps some equity changes to make our fare policy a little more equitable. So I just want to talk to you briefly about how we go through the planning process for a service change, talk a little bit about fixed route, paratransit, and fares, and then where we go from here. Certainly, as you recall, in May, I believe it was, you adopted, or April, the short-range transit plan, the 5-year document that guides our development and operations of transit services over the next 5 years. We had some recommendations in that document that basically said, looking out 5 years without additional funding, we don't see a whole lot of opportunity to do service expansions, but let's continue to look for opportunities at service efficiencies. And so that's certainly something we're doing right now with finance, a department, as we've started on the 2019 budget cycle. We, of course, are revisiting our financial projections, making sure we're clear what do we have going forward. We'll develop some initial concepts, some of which are in this agenda item. We solicit your input and thoughts, and then we go out to the public. And we'll hold at least one, maybe two outreach efforts to the public to get both their input, additional input, as well as let them see what we're talking about, and then we bring the final recommendations back to you. So this is a table I believe, Commissioner Hartung, you were referring to. We always like to just take a look at, here's our 25, 26 routes that we operate. How do these all perform relative to one another? We use green, yellow, red. It sort of gives a good visual there. 10 most productive routes are in green. Those sort of cautionary routes, but they're doing okay around the system average, are in yellow. And then our least productive routes are in red. And so when we get requests for more service to Sun Valley, or when are we going to get a bus out to the Galleria and Sparks, Spanish Springs, those sorts of things, particularly new service, the only place we've got to take service to give that new service from is existing service. And so we look at these least productive routes, and that's where we might say that can we take any of that, move it somewhere new, and be confident that we're going to benefit more people. And that generally is what productivity is all about. The challenge, of course, is anytime you take service away from somebody who's got it, you're taking something that they, as good or bad as it is, they're depending on it. The person who doesn't have any service is getting by. You know, they want service, but they're getting by. So there's those trade-offs that are really challenging and can be difficult to reconcile. but I just wanted to give you a sense of that. Looking at it graphically on our community, the same red, green, yellow, you can see we've got a lot of red, but we've got a lot of green throughout the community, and then that yellow. So those are the routes that we just look at and say, is there opportunities to improve, add to, or should we be cutting those back as we move forward? Another way of looking at all this information here, every route is shown. The blue is the ridership for these routes on a monthly basis. The red dotted line is productivity. So you can see on the left there, the rapid service, our most productive service. We carry more passengers per hour. We're up about 50 passengers an hour on that route, all the way to the right, where we've got Route 1955. Intercity is on there, but intercity is a little special case because of the nature of that service. You pick up a bunch of people essentially at one location, couple of stops, you take them all the way to Carson City, and you drop them off. So the measurement of productivity there, there's better ways to look at that we'll bring back to you so you can have a better gauge for that. But this gives you overall average productivity in red line all the way across, and the average in blue line for ridership. So these are just, as we examine the system as a whole, these are the kinds of things we look at. I shared this with you back when we were developing the SRTP, just as an example of route level boarding and lighting analysis, where we're looking for the bigger the circle, the better in terms of where people are getting on or off. Red is where they're getting off, and green is where they're getting on. So this is just a outbound. So this is everybody heading from downtown out to Lemon Valley on Route 17. We look at that. Where we have big gaps where there's nothing going on, that either means in the case of we're operating on 395, that's for speed, so that we can keep this route together in a reasonable cycle time. But in other areas on North Virginia, there's just not a lot of ridership. So we want to look at, and this is where the microtransit concept has been coming in a little bit, are there ways to serve that Lemon Valley population, serve that population around Parr Boulevard, and maybe over there in the Raleigh Heights area, but not be running a full-size bus all the way up through there. And I'll talk a little more about that in just a moment. So as we look at right now, what we're conceptually looking at for service changes in September, improvements of running time. We've done quite a bit of analysis with a more sophisticated software that we have and our understanding of how to use that software. So I commend my staff on that. We're looking at actual running times in a much more micro level, which is allowing us to see that we can adjust schedules to reflect what it actually takes to run the route and give a more true bus book reliability for people. Virtually every route in our system can have those adjustments, and we're going to focus again on the worst, the ones that are most out of line with their running time and the schedules. And if we can do all of them, we will. If we can only do half of them, we'll focus on those ones that are the worst performers in that regard. Restoring service from less productive to more productive, that's that red, yellow, green. There truly is, if you as a board direct us to focus on productivity, carry the most people for the fewest dollars, there's quite a number of changes we can do, including the request for service out in Sun Valley, better service. That is our second most productive route in the system. We formerly went deeper into Sun Valley, and we believe that some adjustments and additional service there would result in even more productivity. But to do that, we would have to take service from somewhere else, and that's the direction and challenge we face and are looking for from you. The primary transit network is essentially those routes that in the future development, they might become light rail, they might become streetcar, who knows what, but those are our strongest corridors, our strongest routes, and we could, any investment in those green routes would pay higher dividends, if you will, in ridership than the others. So we continually look to that and look for direction from you on, is that a direction we ought to go? I didn't get it in here because the information Lee shared with you briefly on some trends that are now being understood nationwide is maybe that's not a good thing because what's happening is gentrifications of downtowns that are redeveloping are pushing lower income people further and further out into the suburbs and rural areas where transit services aren't necessarily as good. So in terms of the people who might be most dependent on our transit, they may be the ones in those areas that we identify with red, poor performers. So those are difficult trade-offs for us to look at. But this microtransit concept, which is catching fire around the country, is the notion of how do we better serve those low-density areas with smaller vehicles on a more on-demand type service. And a lot of this is coming up with the apps that people have on their phones and other ways to really do more of a real-time, I want to get from this area near my home or even my home. We don't take them door to door like Uber or Lyft would or even Access would, but we bring them in to a hub, a major service area where they could then use transit, the fixed route, to complete their trips. So we're looking at that both in Sparks and in the North Valleys area as to how that might work. I just told you pretty much what microtransit is. So these are the two areas that we think are ripe for some of that. The Spanish Springs, North Sparks sort of area, Route 26, 25. And what we would do is bring those passengers into Centennial Plaza, where they would transfer to very good frequent service in our new Lincoln line that'll be starting this summer, as well as the other routes that serve that. North Valley, same thing. Those people could be brought into something connecting with the Route 7 that might be streamlined, perhaps to the Bonanza, where we have good service, and then could go up to TMCC and do better connections there. So that's the sort of things we're looking at. It would be radically different than anything we've ever done. So we would probably move into this cautiously and as a demonstration. It would require different vehicles than we currently have available in our fleet mix. So might not be something we can implement in September, but could be something that we roll in as part of our service adjustments and new contract that I'll be talking to you shortly about for fixed route services beginning in 2019, actually fiscal year 2020. Access, we really try our best to, when we make changes to fixed route, look at the access program. The two are complementary. Access is a complementary service to that fixed route. The ADA sets parameters for how that's provided that should be augmenting and complementary to the fixed route. You can go above and beyond what the ADA requires, which historically many agencies, including the RTC, have done. But in declining resources, revenue resources, expanding demand, agencies across the country are trimming back to what the ADA requires. That's pretty much these last three bullets here that we are going to be bringing forward, we think, with recommendations to you to do. One is eliminate all of our non-ADA service area. So that is the area outside of that 3/4 mile boundary from a fixed route service. We're not required to provide it. It's very expensive to provide. And right now, because of our funding, we're providing very little of it. And so the impact on the few passengers, 7 to 8 passengers a day who are able to take advantage of that, we believe is pretty negligible. We're also working very hard with social service agencies and other alternative transportation sources, some of which we fund through our 5310 program, to step up and help replace any service that we might pull back from. Access same days and hours of RTC ride service. I know, Chairman Smith, that's something you've really been advocating for some time. Essentially how that works is if a bus route, a fixed route, ends, say, at 10 p.m. or midnight on a weekday, we do not need to provide access service to people who live along that route beyond that. Currently, we provide access 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, but we really only have one route on the Virginia Street corridor, fixed route, that is 24/7. And so the rest of the service in our community could be brought back to the same hours and days that the fixed route provides. And we think we now have better tools for communicating that and explaining that to our customers, and the impact would be fairly minor there. The Washoe Senior Ride Program, our Taxi Bucks program, is a subsidized taxi program for seniors that this board has had in place since about 2002. We would like to liberalize that a little bit. We see a growing demand among seniors in our community for transportation. We think this is a fairly inexpensive way to address some of that demand and need, and this could help replace some of what we would scale back in the non-ADA service. We've also been having dialogue with both Uber and Lyft on participating. Uber appears to not be very interested. That's not quite their business model in terms of this. But Lyft is actually kicking something off with the Sierra Nevada Transit Coalition next month, I believe, that we think gives us some opportunity there. So expanding that program, we believe, would be a good thing. And then the no-show policy, I went into a little detail on that in your agenda item. It's simply how do you address and deal with customers who sign up for a trip and then don't appear. And that makes it very difficult from an efficiency and standpoint of providing service to those who need it if you have too many of these no-shows. And through our annual triennial review with the Federal Transit Administration a couple of years ago, they felt our policy was not appropriate. It unfairly penalized users who don't ride very often compared to heavier users. So we're aligning that policy, and we'll bring that back to you in what we think is a more fair and equitable manner to help control that. Fares, I've got quite a bit in your agenda item talking about fares. We're looking at a lot of possibilities for liberalizing, if you will, our fare policies with an sole attempt to increase ridership. But we have to be sensitive and aware of if we make fares less or more liberal, what does that do to our revenue that we get from fares? So we have to be very careful about that. But we're working with both TMCC and UNR on a possible pilot program for having essentially a UPass program that is available free with the showing their ID to ride our system. That could extend to the employees as well and faculty and staff of the universities. Many transit systems, we talked to you, and I'll talk a little more about the difficulty recruiting and retaining transit employees. One of the easy benefits that are being tapped into around the country is expanding the transit benefit from of being able to ride transit for free from just the employee to the immediate family members. So all of you are able to ride our transit system by showing your ID, your commissioner ID to our drivers, and we're thinking that we might recommend expanding that so your spouses, your immediate dependents could also come get an ID from us and ride, as well as the MV and Ride Right contractors. So that's something that would be really not a revenue loss to us, would be an incentive to and a benefit that would help attract and retain particularly transit contract employees. I won't go through the rest of these right now, but we're looking at just ways to make eliminate the use of cash as much as we can, move people to fare media, including our mobile fare media. But there's a Civil Rights Act that governs this called Title VI that also has to make sure that not everyone can afford or has a smartphone, so we still have to maintain cash. We still have to maintain ways for others to access our system, and we're working through those details, but we think we can come up with a much more innovative, creative, efficient way to pay fares and hopefully make our fare policies more equitable with that. Next steps, we'll be holding open houses in February, getting feedback, presenting some of these ideas to the public. We'll come back to you with what we've heard and some refinements to these ideas in March. And then we hope to have a public hearing for these changes in April. We could also have another hearing in May if we're unable to address all of the questions or issues that you might have in April. But really, past May, we can't adopt things in June and get them in place by September. There's just too much work to be done. So we're going to try and give you, hopefully, one bite at that apple in April, and then we keep you informed enough that you feel comfortable, and the public, with making those decisions at that time. But if we need to come back in May, we've got room in that schedule to make that happen as well. So with that, I would solicit other ideas, concerns, anything. Obviously, you don't have to do it here. You have my email, you have my phone number. Things that you might hear from constituents on service, we'd like to be able to consider that and bring it back to you as appropriate.
Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is in a time when we've got an increased demand for service, and we're looking at how we balance that demand with the ability to provide it. And one of the problems that I hear from people why they don't use public transit is, one, it's a mile walk to my bus stop. Two, I stand at my bus stop for an hour and wait for a bus. Three, I've got to be in town at 8 o'clock, and the bus can't get me there at 8 o'clock, and I'd like to be home at 5 o'clock, and the bus can't get me home at 5 o'clock. All of those are to address those issues, we've got to increase our level of service, and that's, with the funding we've got available, is a pretty hard thing to do. So the micro service brings a new twist to that. My primary question onto that micro service, though, is that going to be a contract or that service going to be provided by the same provider as providing our bus service? Is that the idea that we move forward, that we would get a fleet of smaller vehicles and they would operate the smaller vehicles as well as the buses?
That's a great question, and depending on the timing of it, we have several different options. Certainly, with both of our existing contractors, there could be an opportunity to use one of them to do that. Our thinking at this time is it wouldn't be the fixed route contractor, MV, but it would be our paratransit contractor, Ride. They have the smaller vehicles. We might be able to actually rebrand a couple of access vehicles for this. They also might be able to bring in some vehicles more quickly through some other means that we have available to us. If we wait to develop this further and expand this, we would roll it in as part of our RFP for the fixed route contractor and potentially look at 2 contracts. We could have actually a third contractor who comes in and operates these microtransits for us, or it could be whoever responds to an RFP that we issue in the next 6 months, roughly. So we're still working through those possibilities.
And as I read this report, one of my main concerns is that this has all got to be coordinated.
Absolutely.
And to have multiple providers trying to coordinate becomes problematic. And we currently have some problems with our access and scheduling and people being dropped off at places and then their ride not coming back for them, or their ride coming back for them and not finding them right away, so they leave them. If we expand their duties, the access to duties to further, and that causes a conflict with them too. So I think that while it's the concept of it sounds like a good idea, that the devil's in the details, and to make sure that coordinates. I mean, a person gets on his smartphone and is expecting a ride to get to work at 8 o'clock, and that ride doesn't show up until 8 o'clock. They're not going to use it again. And then we've got money invested into a program that people won't use because we haven't got consistency in the way the service is provided. So I think that I think that matching it with the rides, matching that service with your MTV carrier, having them expand their service to provide the smaller vehicles would probably be the best match, because they're running both routes, and so their timing with those routes is probably easier for them. I've got a concern. The majority of people that we have that use transit are on limited incomes. And so while rates may be low to make us be able to provide services, if we raise rates, we're probably going to lose ridership. So I kind of like your idea, some of the unique ideas you have here for reducing costs by and increasing ridership through the reduced costs. Some of the things that is having annual passes or something of that nature for people that ride the transit all the time, so that they've got a pass that they pay less money for, but it ensures that they're riding that transit consistently and brings our ridership up. So there's a lot of problems to resolve the issue, and they say at the time when we've got more people asking us for service and expanding our service into areas that we aren't serving now, and the limited revenue we have to do it. It's a pretty hard project to accomplish.
It's definitely challenging, and your points are well made, and the devil is always in those details. And we will rest assured we'll do our best to performance manage any contractor to make sure that we do this well. But we don't want to rush out into something new, particularly if it's taking away, depending on your perspective, maybe it's not the greatest service, but it works for me and I'm familiar with it. And so when you all of a sudden remove that and introduce something new, we sure want to make sure that's better for most people. So we're going to be very careful with that. Thank you.
Ms. Jardin.
Thank you very much. Can you put that one slide up that you showed? Thank you. Showed down at the bottom where it said seniors, and you had the age being dropped down to.
Oh, good catch. I skipped over that.
60. Well, two questions. I'm glad we're going to still pursue Lyft. I have said ever since I've been on this board that fixed route doesn't really work for seniors. Their schedules change too often. Bus stops are hard to get to. They need to go to the doctor, then the pharmacy, then the grocery, and that changes all the time. And where these, the technology in Uber and Lyft, why did Uber? I mean, if we subsidize, why would they care? Why are they not interested in tapping into this opportunity?
Well, the opportunity that was presented to Uber was our Taxi Bucks program. And I can't give you a solid answer because I didn't get an email or a letter or something, here's why we're not interested. They just dropped off from being interested. Lyft has continued to show interest, and I want to absolutely acknowledge the Sierra Nevada Transit Coalition, who has really pursued that with some of the projects they want to do. They're attempting to address the outside the ADA service area and people who are eligible for access with Lyft program, and they've essentially got Lyft gift cards that Lyft is making available. So Lyft sees that as being an opportunity. They're willing to play. Uber right now doesn't see that. Both of them have demonstrations with other transit systems, as Rudy mentioned, around the country where they're starting to do paratransit. So there is still some opportunities, I think, there, but it's business models, it's whatever they're pursuing.
It's just strange. I mean, it's such a demand, and it's certainly my role in the City of Reno on the Senior Citizens Advisory Committee. Transportation is one of the top two issues that they speak of all the time. So, well, I guess it's Uber's loss. I mean, if we're going to subsidize, and there's, I don't get it, but okay, I'm glad we're pursuing Lyft. I think that's going to be huge. So talk to me about this. People are healthier longer in life. Life expectancies continue up until just recently to extend. Why would we reduce senior fare from 65 down to 60? What's
right here?
Why? No, you don't.
And me very soon too. Yeah.
But why? I'm confused as to why we would.
We used to be 60. We were 60 up until the beginning of the start of the recession. And in 2000, I believe it was 8, where we were facing a 25-30% service reduction. We were looking at all kinds of things that we might do to obviously reduce costs. Exactly your point. 65 is the new 45, so why not do that? We grandfathered in people, but eventually got to the point where it is now 65 and older. looking at the declining and flat ridership, looking at the reality that, yes, 65 may be the new 45, but a lot of these folks are retired on limited incomes. It's challenging. It was just, should we go back to 60?
Okay.
It's completely your decision as a board, and it would benefit quite a number of folks. Maybe we don't feel that's necessary. So there isn't a compelling reason other than all of these things are looking at how do we get more ridership, how do we help the people who perhaps need that help a little more.
Yeah, I still go back to my argument before that I don't think the fixed routes are what seniors are really striving or needing anyway, but that's beside the point. And the other thing is, I think part of the reason, and I think there is an opportunity, I know as we roll out the Virginia Street Corridor, there's a certain demographic, particularly on the Virginia Street Corridor, that I speak to at the university that don't ride the bus because frankly, it has a stigma to it, or it's just for a certain segment of the population, and it's not particularly fun or cool. And I think as we do the Virginia Street Corridor and we get that double-decker bus, thank you, Lee, and we make it more of an experience, I think you're going to capture a tremendous amount of riders from the university, also those from downtown that want to just go up to the university to catch a game or a music festival or whatever it may be. And then as Park Lane comes on, I think that's going to be another demographic. So I do think we'll get some increased ridership by changing the rider experience within that corridor. But I think we have to understand that there is a stigma with some of the, when you talk about mass transit, it's kind of I think we could improve in that experience and maybe attract a different audience or expand an audience. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my bad, Mr. Jickling, for not being on 5 Point Mole. I lost another patient. Back to writing that book. On the first page, you said, given the financial projections indicate that operating revenues will not keep pace with expenses. This is not new to us. I have a document from 2014 when I was here where we were then losing $2.27 per passenger per ride, and that was on ride. And then on access, we were losing $26.23 per passenger per ride. So this is not a new scenario for us. But the question that I really had was 9th Street. You can go stand out there midday and literally count the riders on one hand that are on those full-size buses. Why not flex those to places where you do have ridership? The example might be to doctor's offices, medical facilities, those kinds of places that would attract ridership during the day. Spanish Springs, there's an urgent care in the Galleria. Those kinds of places, trying to access that, which aren't commuter-oriented. They're not going to happen on Route 18. It's your 10th busiest route. 21,316, and I'm assuming that's not per day. That's a monthly number, correct? That's for the entire month of November.
Correct.
Right. So that said, if you look at the hours of actual peak ridership, you're probably going to find that they're in the morning and they're in the afternoon. So if you reduce the number of stops that Route 18 makes during midday, and maybe we already do this and I'm just not aware of it, but change the number of stops midday and flex that to someplace else, or in lieu of running the 92-footer, run something smaller, and especially there are many places that don't have easy access for buses, where if we don't have high ridership, use something that's more nimble. Something that can easily pull into traffic and one of the micro transit considerations where you're just using, a smaller bus, a 9-passenger van.
Yeah, and that's what microtransit attempts to do. Prior to that, they called it route deviation.
Okay.
Prior to that, you know, a lot of these things are resurrected with different names from the past. You know, dial-a-ride is essentially microtransit. We used to call them dial-a-ride. So,
Right.
you know, but dial-a-ride didn't have the apps and all the technology that we have today. So these things are all evolving, and so that is exactly what we're going to try and look at. You know, the intersection, I think you're probably talking about right here, 9th and Sutro, when
Yeah.
you say 9th Street.
Yeah.
You know, that one, the only sort of cautionary information I'd let you make you aware of is there's buses going by there every 15 minutes. So when you sit and look, you're seeing a 15-minute snapshot of who's waiting to get on or off that bus.
Doesn't need to be a full-size bus, David.
But it goes elsewhere that we do. I mean, I don't.
All I'm saying is flex the smaller
Yeah.
one in here and use the larger one.
This corridor, Sutro, is our most busy corridor in the entire community.
I'm not denying that.
Yeah,
but
so we do get full, but we want to look at exactly what you're talking about in areas where that may be appropriate. Perhaps it is here. That hadn't been one that we initially thought would be on our radar for microtransit, but I think it could be. We'll certainly look at that.
I would love to see operating costs per passenger and the subsidy that we have for 2018. I'd love to have that document.
We'll absolutely bring that as we come back with some additional recommendations and things. I'll share all that.
I'd rather have it sooner rather than later. Perhaps you can email it to me.
I can email it to you.
That would be great.
You bet.
And again, all I'm suggesting is when we look at per passenger versus operating cost, are we really being cost-effective when you're running a full-size bus to pick up even, 3 passengers every 15 minutes? Is that cost-effective? And I would submit to you that maybe it's not. It's not necessarily always about the driver and about the labor, but it's the cost of operating that vehicle in that constant scenario, not only gas, but maintenance, of course.
Yep, good points.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, looking for a motion to accept the report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously, and looks like you're in the bucket again here, David.
Well, you know,
5.3.
I haven't been up in front of you in so long, I thought you probably missed me.
Well, you've
so-
taken advantage of it, that's for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David Jickling, Director of Public Transportation and Operations. This one I'll make short. I don't even have a PowerPoint for this one. But this, and I think the previous 2 agenda items actually kind of roll nicely into this. We're starting with the process of putting together the RFP for the fixed route contract. This current contract with MV expires June 30th, 2019, and was a 7-year, essentially, total contract. And so as we go forward, we've obviously learned a lot about our turnkey contract with MV. The economy has changed. The community's perception, the nation's perception of transit, technologies have changed. All kinds of things have changed that we want to make sure going forward with the RFP that we hope to issue this fall considers those changes and really makes the next contract more flexible, more pliable, more everything in terms of what we're trying to do with transit. So last month, as you recall, we talked about one of the bigger emerging challenges just in the industry, and that is wages. And we talked a little bit about some of the things that our current contractor, MV, has been doing to try and address that. They've increased training wages unilaterally. They've hired some new positions for recruiting, customer service in terms of handling complaints, things like that. So we really are focused, both our contractor and the RTC, on quality of service and reliability of service, and that is part of why we felt we had to make some changes here in the next week or so to ensure that reliability of service. So as we look forward to 5 years of financial projections, we anticipate just status quo operating costs will go up for a variety of reasons related to labor costs and things like that. The current projections built that in. We built in about a 5% per year increased operating cost status quo. However, if year one of our contract jumps by 10% or something like that as a relationship to needing to set base wages or something like that that we may feel is necessary, then that 5% each year grows on top of a 10% first year instead of a 5% first year. So we really do see it being, regardless of what we do going forward, it's going to be challenging to provide the same level of services today as we have in the past going forward without additional revenues. Those additional revenues, we're not quite prepared to tackle initiatives on that, but we don't have a lot available to us other than at some point in the future permanently flexing that 1/16 sales tax that could go to either the road programs or the transit programs to transit, and then seeking additional sources from the community. Those are really our options right now as we see them. Given all that, we've just laid out a half dozen or so things that we're looking at. We want you to be aware we're looking at it and get your reaction if we're heading down the wrong path, if you have concerns. Again, this is going to be the next 6 months or so of developing this RFP. There'll be ample opportunity, I hope, for you to feel that if you have new ideas, new thoughts, concerns, you can share them with us. But that base wage, in the paratransit, we did establish a base wage that increased the starting pay for a driver by a couple dollars an hour. We believe that that will likely need to be done for the fixed route contract. In initial dialogue with 3 of the main operators out there, they're seeing that happen in RFPs across the nation. Communities all across the country are recognizing the economy is driving this. The contractors can't be expected to make these bids on long-term contracts knowing what was going to happen, and they're all raising base rates. So that may be something that we too will bring to you and recommend to you. Contract term length. There's benefits in longer contracts for a variety of reasons, but we also want to make sure we have very well thought out exit clauses, if you will, if things don't go well, both for us and the contractor, if things just aren't working out the way we thought. The innovative service options, we've talked a little bit about some of those with microtransit, more brokering perhaps with Ubers and Lyfts, other kinds of things that we might be able to bring in there. There's a lot going on in the country in terms of the world of transit, and we'd like to make our RFP give proposers an opportunity to address those things, perhaps even pitch ideas to us that we hadn't thought about. Performance initiatives obviously are very important. We do have liquidated damages in both of our contracts, and we've used them. But what some will tell you is all contractors do with liquidated damages is they build them into their bids. And so you're going to pay for them one way or another. So what we'd like to think more carefully about is really being focused on what are the essential liquidated damages that are critical, and perhaps not have as many, but have the ones that really have some meat and meaning to them. But armed with that, perhaps, are bonuses. And some of the contracts now and some of the contractors are saying, you know, let us work with you. We'll share some of that risk in providing these services. You know, we don't have a separate marketing department anymore. We do our marketing quite well with existing staff, but some of the contractors are thinking, give us an opportunity to bring our marketing resources to bear, to bring our ideas and share some of that risk. So I think that's something that's intriguing, and we want to talk with you about. As to Commissioner McKenzie's questions earlier, possibly multiple contracts. Maybe we have a contractor independently who's operating these microtransits versus the paratransit and the fixed route. And then the last, and we also talked about that a little bit, this was sort of coincidental, but is the bus stop maintenance issues. Bus stops are complicated. I kid you not, they probably cause us as much consternation as anything else we do in the transit system. And being agile and responsive to both your needs, but the local jurisdiction needs, residents and businesses' needs on either improving them, maintaining them, modifying them, requires quite a bit of effort. It certainly is possible to have the contractor to continue to be responsible for that, but I think there's some merit to looking at should we be just handling that and bringing those responsibilities back into the RTC fold where they were prior to 2008, 2009. That does a few things for us. It also gives us perhaps better response of maintenance to our facilities, our transit centers, which we're responsible for, our terminal facility, things like that. No right way on any of these things. There's just ways. Every community does it differently, and we just want you to be thinking about that and hopefully give us your direction, feedback as we come forward.
Okay, questions or comments? Mr. McKenzie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think that the idea of having some incentives for new ideas and improved services and stuff is a good idea, but I think that you can't offer the carrot without having the stick, and so while there's an opportunity for them to get a bonus for providing a better service than anticipated, there has to be repercussions if they don't provide the service that we need. And then I still think that if we try to bring separate contracts in, separate service providers in to provide this service, that we're gonna end up with problems. And I think that the idea of having them offer innovative ideas, and if this is one of the ideas that works with them, that they can provide, that's a good option. But if they don't want to provide it and we've got to go out and enter into another contract, that's additional expense on the RTC, and then it becomes problematic with them coordinating. So that's my comments on your ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? David, I have a couple questions. When we talked about operating costs going up, and several years ago, the price of fuel went down quite a bit. What did we do with that fuel savings? Plus, we've bought some electric buses, and we've got some more on order. Electric uses no fuel, plus the maintenance charges are less because they're not shaking and everything else like the diesel.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
what have we done with that savings?
Well, a couple things. One is during the recession, we completely drew down our reserve.
Okay.
And we maintain a 2 to 3 month operating reserve. We've built that back up.
Okay.
So you're right, diesel fuel prices have been below what we've budgeted for, so we are seeing that, and that's part of our operating balance, our reserve, if you will, and is part of when we finish our 5-year analysis and looking at the budget process coming up, we may conclude, actually, there is a little room to do something, so I haven't, we don't fully have an answer to that yet, but we will when we bring these forward to you. The electric buses don't use diesel, but they use electricity, and we pay for that, and we are still coming out ahead. The electric costs are less than the diesel costs, not as much as we originally thought, because fracking and other petroleum exploration has really glutted that market, so prices are low. But we see some benefits there. So we're looking at all those things,
Okay.
And we'll keep you apprised as to what we understand with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? David, what kind of direction are you looking for in this motion? We're going to accept the board
Right now, just
report?
accept it, be aware of what we're looking at. We certainly want to make sure when we come back, we don't have, how come we haven't heard about this? So our goal is to keep you as aware as we can. And please, anytime, any thoughts, share them with us. We'll be obviously talking with the public as well, but we're going to give you all of the information we possibly can to make good decisions on this.
Okay. Looking for a motion to accept the report.
Second.
Paul? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes
Thank you.
unanimously. Thank you, David. Good reports.
I like the idea of chairs, like you have in Sparks. My legs are getting a little sore. Thank you.
Well, we could limit all the presentations to 5 minutes. And
That's true, too.
Yeah. We're about ready to serve lunch. Okay, 6.1, engineering. Is this you, Lee?
Mr. Chairman, item 6.1 is acknowledge receipt of a letter from Jacobs Entertainment, Inc., and provide directions to staff concerning a possible public-private partnership between Jacobs Entertainment and RTC to develop roundabouts and related improvements on West 4th Street. A while back, RTC was approached by Jacobs Entertainment to discuss the possibility of how to move forward with a number of improvements along West 4th Street that would be consistent with a corridor plan that was developed several years ago by RTC to improve the roadway, bike lanes, and the sidewalks. The idea of roundabouts was also introduced as a way to perhaps do a couple things. One, improve traffic flow but also lower operating cost and provide more of a urban ambiance to the area to facilitate part of what Jacobs Entertainment would like to do, which is redevelop the area into what I believe is called the Fountain District. You have been provided, I believe everyone got a copy of this letter from Lewis and Roca today. This is basically a letter that says that they have an intent under, I believe it's NRS 338, Section 161. Under that provision of law, we are allowed to accept proposals from private entities to do public infrastructure projects. This item really specifically is to seek guidance from the commission and proceed should they submit that letter, which is my understanding they intend to do that pursuant to their letter dated December 27th. And then from there, this commission would begin to take a look at the issues and move forward and come back with recommendations and see how we would do this. Real advantage of this for us is, one, the improvements that are being proposed are consistent with city policy, master plans by the city. It also allows for the RTC to advance forward some of the plans and improvements for the corridor that it's put in the out years of our RTP simply because of a lack of funding. With that, staff recommends awaiting the letter and then working with Jacobs Entertainment to see how we can make this unique and cutting-edge opportunity for our community come forward. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Garrett, did you want to say anything? You can sit back down and you don't have to say anything. Any questions or comments? Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And whether we like it or not, it looks like if we're going to have infrastructure improvements, that our federal government's pushing us to P3 partnerships. And while I'm not a big fan of those arrangements, in certain cases, it's an opportunity to get improvements done in a manner that we can't afford to do in a timely manner. So I've looked at the proposal that Jacobs is putting forward. I think it's beneficial to the community, and it's a unique way to get it done without us having to figure out how to fund it out of our budget. So I think it's a good idea. I would recommend that we have staff move forward in discussions on this.
Okay. Ms. Jardin?
Thank you very much. I'm more wondering about the timeline. How long do we anticipate kind of this discussion period will take? Because I know we held off on putting the light in because we wanted to explore this roundabout. I just want to make sure that the permanent improvements, what's the timeline?
We'll have an answer here.
You want to address it?
Thank you very much. Chairman, Commissioners, Andy Durling with Wood Rogers representing Jacobs Entertainment. As far as timing goes, if you recall, back in July, we came with a similar proposal to the Reno City Council. As part of that was to make some interim improvements to improve pedestrian safety at the Washington intersection in particular. Those improvements were completed in December. And in the city's motion, I think we got 2 years to kind of work through the details of these roundabouts. We're definitely motivated to move quickly. So as Mr. Gibson said, a letter is forthcoming from us proposing more of the details, and we hope to move quickly on this.
Okay, good. And I think the interim improvements, by the way, are good. I drive that with some regularity, but the bigger picture, the more permanent improvements, faster, the sooner, the better. So, good.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Lucy?
You know, I believe that Jacobs Entertainment and the individuals with Jacobs, the representatives, have proven to be as transparent and open with us through the process. And I believe their intent to bring forth the Fountain District and is of a great benefit to the downtown Reno area. I think that this is just really an olive branch offering for them to continue that process and work with us as RTC. And as Commissioner McKenzie pointed out, you know, unfortunately, the federal government doesn't allow us to. Currently, we're fighting for funding from the federal government, and so looking at P3 and opportunities like this is going to be beneficial as we move forward. And with individuals like this, I think it's of great benefit to the RTC to get future improvements to the area that we may not be able to achieve within a relative amount of time. So I would support this moving forward.
Okay, anyone else? You know, for me, I've seen the preliminary concepts, and I'm impressed with the whole project, and downtown Reno could certainly use this project as well as increased lighting throughout the city. So I'll stop talking and looking for a motion.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Jardin and Mr. McKenzie. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, 6.2, acknowledge receipt of a 4th Street Parade Away monthly progress report.
Mr. Wilbrecht.
Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the RTC Board. I'm Jeff Wilbrecht, Project Manager on the 4th Street Parade Away BRT project, and I'm here to give you the monthly update for December. So over the course of the past month, we're about 63% of the way through the working days of the project. Over the past month, there's the kind of things that impacted the 5-day work week of the contractor included one weather day on December 20th, and then there was Christmas and New Year's. Speaking to our budget, there's been no change orders to the budget. The contractors billed roughly $18.8 million as of the end of December. Big utility work over the last month included the El Rancho water main work. This included connecting the 36-inch water main in El Rancho to another 10-inch pipe, and then to a 20-inch water main that goes up El Rancho. This was a huge component of work that just got done. And then we're also continuing storm drain work into Reno, and that's progressing actually pretty quickly. It's going really well. And then, as you all know, this is a big dry utility project. So in Reno, they've begun the removal of curb gutter and sidewalk, and followed quickly behind that is the placement of streetlight conduit. And then also in Reno, we've done a lot of service connections. So NV Energy's been working really hard to reconnect all the businesses on the south side of the road from the overhead poles that we will eventually be removing. And actually, there's only one business that's remaining on the south side in Reno, so they've done a lot of work. Also in Sparks, kind of between the 18th Street and 22nd Street section, the contractor's been doing a lot of work to place the utility boxes. And now that that's completed, the specific utilities, so Verizon, AT&T, Charter, NV Energy, are beginning all their work to relocate their overhead utilities to underground. So that work is ongoing currently. And then we've also done a lot of work to start placing the traffic signal poles. So all of Sparks gets all new traffic signal poles, and we've done the 12th Street and 15th Street. Coming up is Sullivan and 21st Street. Moving on with the public improvements. So since all the curb gutter sidewalk has been completed, the utility work in Sparks is ongoing. The contractor's also been starting to do all the curb gutter sidewalk into Reno. So if you go drive Reno right now, there's curb and gutter all the way up to essentially Sutro Street right now. And the foundation at the BRT stop at 15th Street has been constructed. And this is the mock-up station, so this is going to be used as the example on the project. Also, with the completion of the Pyramid McCarran project, we were able to reincorporate the traffic cameras that they had on that project, and so we're now using them on this project just to kind of provide more outreach and help to show kind of what's happening. And so those are at El Rancho, Galletti Way, and Sage Street. And as the project's moving east to west, so as the east gets done, we'll just continue to flop those cameras to the west. So to kind of talk about what's going to be happening over the next month, really it's all curb gutter, storm drain, kind of work into Reno, continue the storm drain work, continue the placement of curb and gutter, continue sidewalks. So you'll start to see sidewalks going in the Reno section on the south side of the road. And then the Sparks work, it's really starting to wrap up in terms of the curb gutter sidewalk. There's still a lot of paving to do, but they're going to continue to do the utility tie-overs between the 18th and 22nd Street. And we're also eventually going to be placing the traffic signal poles, as I mentioned earlier, at Sullivan and 21st. That's actually happening next week, so that'll be happening. And then the mock-up station. So next week, I believe, we're going to start erecting the steel for the mock-up station, so it'll really start to take shape and kind of see what it's going to look like. And with that, I'm really happy to take any questions or comments that you may have.
Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last month, we were at 8/6 for our completion date, and So we've added an additional 7 days. That one day was a weather day.
Correct.
We've added a total of 59 days to this project so far, and about 11 of those have been weather days. The rest of them, we've been trying to pan off on the fact that we've got a holiday, which the holidays are holidays every year, and that those weren't already built into the contract, that we'd add additional days of work because of a holiday. I hope we aren't doing that on all our contracts, because those holidays don't move.
So to talk about the change from last month to this month, there was just that one weather day. That is not counted as a working day against the contractor. And it just so happens that the 8/6 to 8/13 is right at Haggadah nights. That is also incorporated into the contract for the contractor not to be able to work during that time period. So it was going to end on a Monday, and then it now is moved to the following Monday.
And Hot August nights happens the same time.
Absolutely.
And to add additional days to the contract
So there-
because of a special event that happens every year. I mean, we're giving these guys a lot of days, and not very many of them justified.
Any other questions or comments? You know, for me, Jeff, I know we've given you a lot of grief on the time frame and some of the delays and everything, but I was over there the other day, and the finished product is very nice. I'm pleased with that part of it. Obviously, we try to keep on schedule, but the moving the utilities underground and everything, what a difference it made in that whole corridor, so good job.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, looking for a motion to accept the report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Metropolitan Planning Organization. 7.1, acknowledge receipt of a report on bike share. Amy.
Thank you very much. Amy Cummings, Director of Planning at RTC. And we appreciated the jurisdictions welcoming us over the last couple of months to talk about bike share. We were able to visit each of the jurisdictions, and all voted in favor of the jurisdiction staff initiating a dockless bike share pilot program. So we're very excited about that. I know staffs at the jurisdictions are excited as well. We are continuing earlier in January to meet with agency staff, code enforcement, and legal teams to try to get things going. City of Reno is really wanting to push the schedule of getting this dockless pilot program off the ground. So staff there have stepped up to lead a regional effort to identify what those permit requirements would be, franchise agreement requirements would be, so that there is consistency for each of the jurisdictions. And again, just as a refresher with dockless, the permits to operate are issued by the jurisdictions, and they're going to be managed and enforced by each of the jurisdictions. And it was pointed out at City of Reno that any of these permits and code updates that may need to be made, the jurisdictions don't want RTC to be doing those. So that's why the Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County have stepped up to take that role. Reno has requested that RTC provide some funding assistance for a consultant to help with that. And again, the role of this consultant is going to be to identify those requirements that we want to build into the permits to operate for the dockless vendor, to protect our public right-of-way, address insurance requirements, number of bikes, phasing in of number of bikes, education for the community, all of those things. So we think that that is certainly something that would be helpful for the regional program so that we have consistency. As again, if you check out a bike in Sparks, you want to be able to ride it to Reno. You don't want to have any issues there. We're also continuing to work on the Transportation Alternative Set-Aside grants. Those are going to be due in February. With the support for the dockless program, we did want to revisit the content of that application. To support the dockless program, we think it would be a good fit to apply for grant funding to support education and outreach on how people should park their bikes appropriately and how to use the systems, as well as a bike helmet program where we could make those free or at low cost available. This is one that we've particularly heard from the jurisdictions to help with signage or providing signage for bike parking. So there may be parking spaces that are identified for bike share designated parking, so marking signage for that. We think that would be a good use of these funds, as well as perhaps some technical or technology opportunities to integrate bike share with our transit passes. So we would like to move forward with those. We have also discussed moving in tandem with a station-based or smart bike program and using these funds for that. In particular, there was discussion of an electric assist bike program, and that's what's in the staff report. Of course, after we submitted the staff reports, a couple of the bike share vendors, dockless vendors, came out with announcements that they're now doing electric assist dockless bike share. So that's an option that didn't exist even a couple of weeks ago that now apparently is going to be available. So again, we would propose focusing on outreach and education, helmets, signage, and integrating with transit system. For
Amy,
those grant
where do the applications due in February, where are they coming from?
One is actually applying to this board for the $300,000 that's available this year and next year through the TA set-aside program. And then you can apply for up to $600,000 to NDOT for the same program. There's a state funding and a MPO portion of those grants.
Is that it? You know, I see the request for 19,500, is that what it is? And my question, and I think you just answered it, I don't mind doing that, me personally, but I don't want the RTC to be paying for this program. And it's a pretty expensive program that we're looking at. Grants, fine if we can get the grants, but I don't want money coming from the RTC to pay for the bike share that everybody seems to want. That's my personal opinion.
I'm glad that you brought that up, the distinction on the two different types.
The dockless doesn't require.
The dockless doesn't have any upfront capital costs for the bikes. So the private companies bring the bikes, and the jurisdictions and RTC wouldn't pay for that. The $19,000 is to support staff in making sure that we have the right protections in place for those permit requirements. If we were to move forward with a station-based or smart bike sort of in parallel, then we would be looking at about an $800,000 capital cost for that, as well as about an $800,000 ongoing operating cost per year that we would need to be looking for private sponsors to help us fund that, because as you mentioned, RTC does not have the funds for that.
Have we done any research on exactly how much we could raise from private sponsors?
We have, with the consultant that we had doing our initial bike share study, and the feedback we've received is that in an area of our size, with our market, it probably could be done. Although there could be challenges now if you have a dockless system competing with that station-based system with getting those sponsorships. So with the market being kind of split between two systems, it could be more difficult to get sponsorships.
Well, again, that being an unknown, if we went with the smart bike and we needed $800,000 a year to run it, and we can only sell sponsorships for $500,000, I don't want RTC to pick up that $300,000. That should be doled out to the entities that are actually using it. Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Amy, I'll go back to what we were talking about. There was a company here in town. Their original concept was actually bike parking structures. It was called Curb. And they were convinced, by the way, by then City Council to go into kiosk parking meters, and it sadly failed miserably, but that was not their original company and not their original design. I have the exact same fears of the chairman. I don't want to go into a publicly funded scenario and then you have someone who wants to come in with a private scenario and you end up competing with them, and the first thing that they're going to call us out on is how can we compete with a subsidized publicly funded program. And so I'm more along the line of trying to get private funding. It's been pretty darn successful in other communities to have this as a business model. And I would rather try to approach them. I don't know whether we have the ridership initially, and maybe that's where we can even help a private company to enter into a public-private partnership where we'll give them some capital up front with the caveat that they'll give us back that money when the program becomes more successful, almost like a low-cost type of a loan scenario. But I'm very concerned with doing a publicly funded scenario, because at the end of the day, there are certain places that will benefit to a great extent and other places that will not benefit at all. Spanish Springs, Washoe Valley, Incline Village, those kinds of places. And so RTC's funding is supposed to be county-wide, And so that now you've got places throughout the county that are still paying into those taxes, but they don't really get the service that you would see in other places. So there's my concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I clearly remember a Reno councilwoman asking RTC to help draft this ordinance, and I think my response to that was that RTC doesn't draft ordinances, that we should have people on our staff. The city of Reno, I'm not sure where the request for funding came from, but I don't think that was the direction the council gave when you came to the council meeting. I don't think the council directed staff to request RTC fund an ordinance drafting. I think that we kind of thought it was important that we coordinate the drafting between the three entities so that we didn't have different ordinances within the three entities, but I don't recall our council asking RTC to fund that process, and so I'm not sure where the request came from, but I think that we as RTC don't draft ordinances, and to ask us to fund the drafting of ordinance within the entities is not a reasonable request. The idea of if we use docked bicycles and the fact that because that would be a transit type network, that we put some funding into it, that to get it started, that was the reason we asked you to move forward with the grant. So I don't have a problem with us moving forward with the grant to attempt to get funding to do the initial setup of the dock stations, if that's the direction we want to go. I know that I just came back from San Diego yesterday, and I talked to a guy that manages their dock stations in San Diego, and they tried dockless, and they had major problems, and the dockless people actually pulled out because it was costing them too much. They were losing bikes. And so we maybe start with this dockless and find out that they can't sustain the dockless because of the issues that they have in other cities with dockless systems, where you can't steal a bike or you can't ride the bike away, but that doesn't mean that the bike can't disappear. And so I think that the direction I remember that we gave our staff was that we move forward with trying to work with Washoe County and the city of Sparks to come up with an ordinance for the dockless so that we could move forward and try to get a demonstration project in the city before the convention that we have coming. So thank you.
Ms. Jardin.
Thank you very much. That was kind of my understanding as well. Is the 19.5 to kind of designate somebody as the bird dog on it? Is that kind of what the role?
Well, we have, through the coordination that we've done up to this point, we have representatives from Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County that are part of our technical team that has gotten us this far. And I think as they're getting into the details of what does this franchise agreement look like, what changes need to be made to the ordinance, there's just so many differences between the jurisdictions that there's a question of, is there the bandwidth at the staff level currently to all do that on their own without some outside consultant support, who can bring in some expertise from the national standpoint of looking at what are these problems other jurisdictions have encountered with dockless, and how can we write permit requirements or franchise agreement requirements that will help prevent those same problems from occurring here. So I think that was the logic at the staff level of thinking, well, if we had some funding for consultant support, we could have a better product and get this done more quickly. But certainly it's up to the will of the board how to proceed.
Well, and I get that. I get that without designating kind of an expert to be the one to circle the wagons and answer all the questions and stuff can lag. And I think that's what we were trying to avoid was, but, I think we want to move quickly with the dockless to get it up and going as a pilot program, and then work through the other things. But I'm with Councilmember McKenzie that I don't remember City of Reno asking RTC to pay something, but I also understand that without a designated person, stuff can lag and everybody's busy and stretched thin, so.
And Lynn Barker is here from City of Reno to speak on this as well. Thank you.
Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. Lynn Barker with the city. So the request, actually, the city had asked both the city of Sparks as well as Washoe County staff that had been engaged in this process over the past 6 or 8 months, whether or not they would have funding to contribute to maintaining the consultant relationship with Bantam Strategies, who has been working with RTC to date, to help us with a couple of things. One is make sure that our RFP is reflective of best practice or in a very rapidly evolving landscape of bike share. You know, as Amy mentioned, every few weeks there are new innovations coming out around bike share. And so I think the issue for the city, and I think the city of Sparks as well as Washoe County, is there is no designated individual that is responsible for bike share or you know, bike infrastructure within our staff. And so nobody has expertise around the issue. And so for a staff member like myself to then go out and have to do the research to figure out what's really happening out there in the marketplace versus having somebody who is entrenched in it and is talking to all the bike share companies and is involved with the National Bike Share Association and understands what all the pitfalls are to be able to advise us. And so the contract really is for us to take the first stab at drafting an RFP, of drafting either a sole source contract or franchise for the docklist, but then having the consultant review to make sure that we are not setting ourselves up for failure, because she has such a deep understanding of the, what's happening at the national scale.
Okay, thank you. And I get the, and I agree that I don't think we want RTC to be in the business of the, you know, the operations, the ongoing operations. But because of the experience with the failed kiosks in the city of Reno, the parking kiosks, and the troubles associated with it, getting out of it, and the headache involved with that, I do think 19.5 from the RTC is probably money really well spent, with the caveat that I don't expect RTC to fund the full thing down the road. But because having gone through that experience intimately, my first year on the council, 19.5 is probably money very well spent.
Okay, any further comments or questions? Amy, what do you want? What do you want us to do?
I agree that the 19.5 would be money well spent to protect the public right-of-way. If we are going, each of the jurisdictions has indicated they want a dockless pilot program, and we want to minimize any adverse sort of consequences of that by being proactive at the front end before those bikes show up in our community.
Okay.
So, staff would support that, and we'd also, you know, like your approval to move forward with a grant to support outreach and education, bike helmets, additional parking and signage, or signage for bike parking, and integrating with our transit system with dockless.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have just a comment.
Mr. Malfabon.
It's a 20% match for the TAP program.
I believe so, yes.
Well, just a word of caution is sometimes people think that some of the costs before you get the grant agreement in place are eligible, and they wouldn't be. So you just want to be aware of the limitations of match.
Understood.
For the partners that are involved in this bike share program.
Did you say TAP?
It's Transportation Alternatives Program. We call it TAP.
Okay. Okay. You done? Okay. Any further questions or comments? Looking for a motion.
Move to accept the report and approve the 19.5 for the consultant.
Okay, we have a motion. Looking for a second?
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay. 7.2, Public Lands Bill. And this is Amy again.
Thank you. Amy Cummings, RTC Planning. And this is an item requested at a previous meeting. We have been working with Washoe County staff as they proceed with developing the Washoe County Economic Development and Conservation Act. We have provided information about transportation corridors. There are, Denise, do you have a separate map as well? Can we bring that up if possible? We've provided information about the right-of-way corridors that are in the Regional Transportation Plan, funded as well as the unfunded needs, so that is going to be integrated in what the county is preparing. And that includes the corridor we were talking about earlier this morning to east of Sparks, as well as the West Sun Valley Connector, the Pyramid 395 Connector, the Eagle Canyon Extension. Those are all included here. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. And we're going to continue to work with Washoe County staff to the extent we can be helpful. And we really appreciate David being here to present more details of the lands bill.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Commission. For the record, Dave Solero, Washoe County Assistant County Manager. I just wanted to give you a brief update on where we stand with the Washoe County Lands Bill, the Economic Conservation Act. So really, you know, the reason we're pursuing this is because Washoe County as a whole is growing, expanding. There are needs for lands, for development. More importantly, development that is smart development, sustainable development. I think you all can understand, you know, some of those struggles that all jurisdictions have related to growth and boundaries and where that goes. There are some federal lands within the kind of the urban core that may make sense to develop in a sustainable way, and so this act is a way to be able to provide some of those lands for development. Additionally, one of the core values of this area is the outdoor opportunities that we have in connectivity to federal lands and what that means to our quality of life. So that is another piece that we're working through with this proposal. The act is broken up actually into two pieces. So there's a kind of a southern Washoe County portion, which is an economic disposal boundary. I'd love to show you the maps, but they're really hard to see in this context. So what I've provided here is a link to the maps on the Washoe County website. The easiest way to get there, however, is just simply to go to washoecounty.us and in the big search bar type in public lands, and the first link will take you to our page talking about this project. So the one piece is the southern Nevada or southern Washoe County kind of boundary, and the other portion is what do we do in the northern part of Washoe County to designate the appropriate conservation designation for public lands. There are currently 9 wilderness study areas that have been sitting out there with nothing really happening. So we're trying to pattern this along with other counties, what other counties have been successful in Washoe County. So the southern Washoe County portion includes transfers to other entities. Washoe County, City of Sparks, City of Reno, RTC, Desert Research, all these public entities for their uses in public purposes. Amy talked about the connectors and things that RTC is specifically looking at. You know, one of the largest pieces that we have here now is Tumwa has a bunch of tank sites and water lines that are under the Recreational Public Purposes Act. Tumwa has requested all of those actually be transferred directly to them instead of being under this act because management of those lands is a little bit easier on the staff because there is a process for the Recreation and Public Purposes Act for maintenance of that ongoing through the years. So local governments, local jurisdictions have requested portions of lands. Those are mapped on a map for actually disposal to those entities for public purposes. If they're not utilized for public purposes, however, they will transfer back to the federal government. What the disposal boundary does is it also creates about 72,000 acres of land able for disposal to private entities, similar to the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, you know, to create a trust for quite a few things. So we're following a similar disposal process where we will nominate lands. The BLM and Washoe County need to sign off that yes, indeed, those are appropriate lands for future development. They don't have cultural or environmental factors that will prohibit that. The nice part about that is, I'm going to skip ahead here, is proceeds for disposal. So proceeds go to the state for education purposes. Proceeds go to the county directly for, again, education, public safety, housing, social services, and some of that regional infrastructure piece. And then there's a large portion of that that actually gets held in the federal government in a special fund for us to be able to utilize for conservation, wildlife habitat, all of these things that are listed here in the local area. Where this is important is some of those in-holdings for some of our connectivity. One of the benefits is this, as you look at the map, Peavine Mountain, for instance, is outside the disposal boundary, because that is an area that has been identified as a cultural resource to the area for connectivity, for hiking, for biking, all these outdoor activities. There are some lands within there that are privately held. Someday someone will figure out how to try to build on those lands. This potentially could provide some funding so that we could purchase those lands, maybe transfer lands to areas that are more suitable for development, let's say. So the last piece of the public lands, which is what we're working on right now, is the wilderness portion, or the protections potentially of these wilderness study areas that are in northern Washoe County. There are 9 of them. We're going through a process right now. Your vice chair, Lucy, has been working with some of the conservation groups, some of the sportsmen, tribal leaders, all of these people trying to define what to do with these wilderness study areas that are just sitting out there, lands in northern Washoe County, held by the BLM that have some constraints on them for wilderness study. We would like to either revert those back to just public lands or continue the process and potentially get them into wilderness or some other protective status. So that is really the presentation that I wanted to let you know where we're at. Time-wise, which is probably the next question that most of you would have, is we're looking to hopefully get something back to Washington, D.C. In the early to late spring of this year for some action with Congress. So with that, I'll leave it open to any questions you may have.
Okay, questions, comments? Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I've kind of been hot and cold on this land bills for a lot of different reasons, but I can tell you that the recent email that Edon sent out threw ice on me over it. Because one of the things that was mentioned in that email from Edon is the fact that because of this lands bill, that there was going to be a bunch of land come open for economic development, and that we should use public funding to build access into that. And to me, we don't do that with development. If development needs to build an access, they build the access. We don't build an access for them. And that email kind of reverted that to say, no, we'll build the access so that then they can go in and develop it. And if that's the intent of what we're going to do with this lands bill, is we're going to open a bunch of land up for economic development, and then we're going to use our public dollars to build access to that public land so that somebody can come in and do economic development on it. I think that that's a major misuse and abuse of our transportation dollars. So that kind of put the frosting on the cake for me. I think that we're doing a detriment to our community with moving forward with this, if that is the intent of what other members of this board and what the rest of the community thinks this lands bill is going to bring us to.
Mr. Lucy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, and Commissioner McKenzie, that is not the intent of the lands bill, and it's not the intent drafted by any language that we have currently, and that is for us to identify economic development land and then enforce the local jurisdictions or entities to provide that transit access to those. It just creates the opportunity for future growth of our community, because at this point, based upon maps, a majority of us have seen through regional planning, our community is becoming very landlocked by BLM, and what it does is clean up the southern area of Washoe County for future progress, so that over the next 20 to 30 years we have future growth that's going to be allowed and be properly managed by the entities here locally, without constraints of having to navigate the federal waters currently through the disposal process. So it really, what it does is bring that access of power back to the county and the entities in which this development is going, and takes that away from the federal government. And no better, in my opinion, nobody knows better about our area than the local the officials and the people that live here versus those who live in Washington, D.C. and predicate how we develop our land based upon their current ownership. 80% plus of our state is owned by the federal government, and it is challenged around our urban areas to grow and manage properly. And this is not just, lands bill is not just for Reno Sparks. This lands bill also is beneficial towards the Gerlach area in regards to its future development. It's also, remember, and it's sometimes difficult to remember, but Washoe County does include many other municipalities, Incline Village being one, Gerlach. A number of those need to be addressed, and so we as commissioners at the county commission have a responsibility to those individuals, and this bill is one of those, addresses many of those issues as well going forward.
Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Lucy articulated it perfectly. The only thing that I would add to that is, because another agency steps forward and says that RTC should do something, that's not necessarily the position of Washoe County. That's not been brought before the board. We've not articulated that position in any way, shape, or form. So we dealt with comments earlier from said agency. So I would say that that's not necessarily the position of the county. I'm not trying to speak for the board.
Gotcha, thank you. Ms. Jardin.
Thank you very much. My only question is, you have a slide here and how land transfers work. The third bullet says, if the local governments does not, whoops, wrong English, but do not use the land for public purpose after transfer, the land reverts back to the United States. What's the time frame? Like how long, if you don't do something, then it reverts back?
So there's currently not a time frame on that. The issue is if I've got a list of these transfers and what the proposed use is. So for instance, if Tumwa has a spot where they want to put a future tank, and so they take a piece of land for a future tank, that is what should be utilized on that. If Tumwa comes back and says, oh no, we want to sell that land for a housing development or something else, then that's when it would revert back to the federal government. So there's not a time frame on it. It's simply, if you tell us you want to use it for public purposes, which is what it's got to be used for, you can't simply sell that and take that funding outside of this program to your own entity. So
Okay, I was more concerned just with the timeline. If you said you were going to build a affordable housing project on it and you didn't in a 10-year span, but you're saying there's not really that restriction on it?
There's not a restriction on these land transfers.
Okay, thank you.
And Dave, for me, building a road out in that area is not just for a new industrial park, it's another exit and entry for the people who live in Spanish Springs, because they, currently they come out Vista or Sparks Boulevard or Pyramid, and whether they're going to Tri-Center, the new industrial center that we're talking about, or just heading on 80 East, it'd be a quick shot out and cut down some of the traffic in town. So it's just not specifically for building a road for any businesses that might want to go in there.
Absolutely. There are a myriad of reasons to do these sorts of things. We're simply trying to facilitate that vessel to make that happen from across public lands.
Okay, Lee, go ahead and ask a question.
I just have one question on the proceeds from disposal. You mentioned that 10% would go to the county to be used for education, public safety, housing, social services, and regional infrastructure. What's regional infrastructure?
So as I understand the intent of the bill, regional infrastructure could be lots of things, whether it's roadways, whether it's utilities, sewers, those types of things that benefit the region as a whole.
Okay. One of my concerns, and I'm going to, make an editorial comment. When I was in Southern Nevada, one of my complaints with the SNPLMA, Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, was all of the proceeds, and there were billions of dollars of proceeds generated, did not go to transportation. And you had these situations where developers were massing together in their consortia, offering bids of billions of dollars or millions of dollars, and none of the set-aside came back to serve the roads. It just served water and schools. So how proceeds are allocated, I think, is something you guys should pay very close attention to. I thought that was a real deficiency with the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act. You had all these developers master planning communities, but as Councilman McKenzie's kind of alluded to, much of the regional infrastructure fell back to the regional providers, and they were not allowed to tap into any of the revenues that were generated by the auctions for that land that went to those developers.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, looking for a motion to accept the report.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, 7.3, approve the proposed targets for the Safety Performance Management Program. Amy.
Thank you. Amy Cummings, RTC Planning. And this is something that we're required to do by USDOT. There have been guidelines or requirements issued called the Safe Performance Management Program. And we've been working very closely with NDOT and the other MPOs in the state over the last year. NDOT has already adopted their performance standards for safety, and we have used their methodology to develop targets for our region as well. And I did want to clarify, we are still a member of the Vision Zero Coalition. However, the USDOT discourages regions from adopting zero as their initial target. They want something that's more realistic, that you are establishing a plan. So in our performance targets, we do get to zero, but it does recognize that it will take time to reach that as a region. So what we're proposing for the performance targets, and these are the measures that are required, is total traffic fatalities. So we're recommending an 8% reduction from the previous year's trend for both total fatalities and the rates per 100 million VMT. For serious injuries, we're in the interesting situation, and you may have looked at some of the charts in the backup. While fatalities have been going up, and the data we had at the time of this analysis was through 2016, we've currently received just this week the 2017 fatality numbers, and we're very happy to report down about 20% from the 2016 numbers. So I did want to make sure you had that, even though it was not available in time for the staff reports. But serious injury rates are actually trending down already. So our performance target here would maintain the current 7% annual reduction in serious injuries, total and per VMT. And the same for non-motorized fatalities, to have an 8% reduction from the previous year's trends. And we do, if you want to see how those would look over time. So the first portion of this line that's in orange is the historic data. Again, this goes back to total traffic fatalities. If we trend line that out, again, this was based on the 2016 was the most recent information. That was a significant increase over time. So our 8% reduction would bring that back down and get us to zero fatalities by the horizon of the Regional Transportation Plan. And this is the same information for non-motorized, so this is bicycle and pedestrian fatalities. Again, we're really happy to report that in 2017, that trend was going down already. We had a 20% reduction in pedestrian fatalities, 2017 compared to 2016. But again, for the performance target in the RTP, these are targets that we will, in a future amendment, bring back to you to incorporate into the Regional Transportation Plan. This is the trend line for injuries, which, as you can see, is already trending downward. Same for non-motorized.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Ms. Jardin.
Thank you. So going back to the non-motorized, obviously the pedestrian incidents are always of concern, and getting our hands around how to impact the improvements there is what we struggle with great regularity. Does your anticipated reduction, is this including the Vision Zero? Is deploying that kind of what you're pegging as potentially impacting this downward trend?
We do. We think that's an essential tool, and we'll be working closely with NDOT as well. We are going to be launching a public information campaign. Again, you'll see an RFP for that here in the coming months to get that underway, to, again, refresh that messaging that the public is seeing, and our coordination with the other jurisdictions through the Vision Zero Task Force.
Okay. Bless you. And then maybe just an update on this as well. We had talked, I know, at the various jurisdictions, and I know here at RTC, about another regional outreach approach with regards to pedestrian distracted driving, distracted walking, all those sorts of things. What's the status of that?
That's the RFP that I'm alluding to. RTC has funding identified for that campaign. We're working closely with the jurisdictions to see if there's additional funding that can maybe support additional media buys for that. But you'll be seeing that RFP here in the next month or two.
So the RFP to put it together.
Correct.
So we won't actually see anything until summer?
Hopefully later in the spring.
Okay. I know we were trying to move quickly on that, given the severity of issues that we sadly see with great regularity. So, and with the passing of, the marijuana, recreational marijuana, how we could do that. So,
Right.
okay.
And we are delving into the data a little bit further to see what are the causes of the fatalities. Is it lack of safety restraints? Is it distracted driving? Is it impairment? What type of impairment? So that we can really tailor that message to what is driving a lot of the need.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Gibson.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Councilman Jardin, I'd like to point out, so what Amy's talking about is, what we're going to do, media relations, et cetera, prospectively. But we had a spate here, a month ago, where we actually ran our sort of stock ads and brought some awareness back and just, re-emphasized the need for people to not use these devices and just do that kind of thing. So we are still continuing to push a safety message. I think the idea here is we're going to do a little deeper dive, create some new messaging, look at some new techniques, and do that. So,
And I would add that the events like we recognized at the beginning of the meeting, the Safe Free Ride, those are also major
Yeah.
initiatives that we do throughout the year to reduce impaired driving, which we know is a major factor in crashes.
Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And although a noble number to 2040 to get it down to zero, I don't think you're ever going to get it to zero. You see tourists who will just literally walk across the street without any thought of the traffic that's coming and not realizing that they're actually breaking the law. And I don't know how you get people to that point where they don't jaywalk. And that's just again, noble direction, but I don't know how you break that behavior. It gets broken once.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, they don't do it again,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, looking for a motion to accept the report. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Amy. Now, in the interest of time, I'd like to move 8.1 to the next meeting. If there's no objections, could I get a motion for that? We have a motion.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. 8.2, legal issues.
Just real quick, if all of you could plan for an attorney-client closed session to brief you on pending litigation before the next meeting, perhaps around 8:15.
Okay.
I would appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. Public comment, I'll open the public comment. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Member items. Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a couple of things that have come up recently along the North Virginia Street corridor. I'd like to see if we could get a discussion about looking at maybe one of the problems we got is that we're not coordinating with the developers in there on improvements in the North Virginia corridor. So we've got development coming in there that could be doing a lot of improvements in that area, and we're not getting coordination on that. So somehow to get that lined out so we can coordinate those and get as much of that done under the developers on offsets, and as we move forward, because that's going to be a vital corridor when NDOT finally gets to doing the improvements on 395. So if we could get an agenda item to discuss those.
Mr. Gibson, you want to say something? No. Okay. Any other comments? Ms. Jardin?
Thank you. I did have the Girl Scouts troop reach out to me and ask for an update on the Be Safe, Be Seen flag program. Oh, they did? Okay. Okay, they just wanted to know what was happening and when and...
I will. Here, put your thing there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.